Chapter 1. Introduction. The landscape of imperfect competition. Good evening. Or, perhaps, good night. As we settle in, let's transition from the broad strokes of market structures to something a little more nuanced. Last time, we explored the theoretical purity of perfect competition and the stark power of monopoly. Tonight, we delve into the fascinating and far more common middle ground, imperfect competition. Specifically, we'll be navigating the intricate landscapes of oligopoly. Think of the economic world as a vast garden. In one corner, we have the meticulously ordered rows of perfect competition, each plant identical, each farmer powerless to influence the price. In another, a towering singular tree, the unchallenged monopoly, casting its shadow over all. But the bulk of the garden, that's where the oligopolies flourish. A handful of strong established plants, each vying for sunlight, each keenly aware of the other's presence. Oligopoly, in essence, is a market structure dominated by a small number of firms. Each firm possesses significant market power, meaning their actions can noticeably affect the market price and the behavior of their rivals. This interdependence is the defining characteristic, the invisible thread that ties them all together. Now, within this oligopolistic landscape, different models attempt to explain and predict firm behavior. Among the most influential are the Cournot and Bertrand models. These aren't simply abstract exercises, they offer distinct lenses through which to view real-world competitive dynamics. They provide us with frameworks for understanding how firms make decisions regarding output and pricing when faced with a limited number of competitors. The Cournot model, named after a classical economist who sought to understand strategic interaction, focuses on quantity competition. Imagine two mineral water companies drawing from the same spring. Each company must independently decide how much water to bottle and sell simultaneously. The crucial assumption is that each firm believes its rival's output will remain constant, regardless of its own decision. This is a world of measured steps, each competitor carefully considering the projected volume of their rivals before calibrating their own production. The equilibrium in the Cournot model is reached when each firm is producing its best output level, given the output of its rival. No firm has an incentive to deviate. It's a delicate balance, a quiet equilibrium forged through strategic anticipation and cautious calculation. The total market output, in this scenario, is typically greater than under monopoly, but less than under perfect competition, with the price falling somewhere in between. Think of it as a controlled release of supply, keeping the market simmering, but never boiling over. Contrast this with the Bertrand model, named after another insightful observer of economic behavior. Here, the focus shifts to price competition. In this framework, firms compete by setting prices, rather than quantities. The assumption is that consumers will buy from whichever firm offers the lowest price. This seemingly small difference in assumption leads to dramatically different outcomes. Consider our mineral water companies again. Under the Bertrand model, if one company sets its price even slightly below its rival's price, it captures the entire market. This creates a strong incentive for each firm to undercut the other, leading to a price war. The theoretical result? The price falls to the level of marginal cost. The same outcome as in perfect competition, even with only two firms. This is known as the Bertrand paradox, a surprising and intellectually stimulating outcome. Of course, the real world is rarely as neat and tidy as these models suggest. The conditions necessary for the Bertrand paradox, perfect information, identical products, and no capacity constraints, are rarely fully met in practice. In reality, firms often differentiate their products, build brand loyalty, and face limitations in their production capacity. These factors soften the intensity of price competition and allow firms to maintain prices above marginal cost. So, how do these models translate to the real world? We see elements of both in various industries. The airline industry, with its fluctuating ticket prices, often exhibits characteristics of Bertrand competition, albeit softened by factors like brand perception and frequent flyer programs. The oil industry, where production decisions are carefully monitored and coordinated, bears some resemblance to the Cournot model. The choice of model and the application of its insights often depends on the specific characteristics of the industry and the nature of the competition. Are firms primarily focused on managing their output levels, or are they engaged in a more aggressive price war? Do consumers perceive the products as identical, or do they value specific brands and features? The answers to these questions help us determine which model is most relevant and provide a more accurate understanding of market dynamics. These models, while simplified, offer powerful tools for understanding the complex interplay of strategic decision-making in oligopolistic markets. They highlight the crucial importance of anticipating rivals' behavior and the subtle ways in which firms can compete, even when facing only a small number of competitors. And as the night deepens and our thoughts drift onward, we must ask ourselves, what happens when these competitors collude? What new shapes does the landscape take when implicit cooperation replaces explicit competition? We shall consider that, and more, in our next exploration. Chapter 2. Defining oligopoly. Key characteristics and market structures. Introduction. Welcome back. Last time, we laid the foundation for understanding imperfect competition, and now we gently transition into the heart of that landscape, the oligopoly. Think of it as a flowing river, diverging from the singular stream of perfect competition and monopoly into a braided channel, a few dominant players shaping the economic terrain. We will define its key characteristics, exploring the different market structures that arise within its bounds, focusing on the Cournot and Bertrand models and their reflections in the real world. Key characteristics of oligopoly. An oligopoly, at its core, is defined by a small number of firms controlling a significant portion of the market. This concentration creates a delicate balance, where the actions of one firm directly and substantially impact the others. Imagine a mobile, where each dangling piece subtly influences the position of the rest. We can isolate several defining attributes. Firstly, there's interdependence. Unlike perfect competition, where firms operate in isolation, oligopolists are keenly aware of their rivals' strategies. Pricing decisions, output levels, and even advertising campaigns become strategic maneuvers within a larger game. Secondly, barriers to entry play a crucial role. These barriers, whether they be economies of scale, patents, or regulatory hurdles, protect the dominant firms from new competitors eroding their market share. It is these barriers that maintain the riverbanks and keep the channel from diverging into too many streams. Market structures within oligopoly. Within this framework, we see a spectrum of market structures. Some oligopolies exhibit collusion, where firms cooperate, either explicitly or tacitly, to fix prices or divide market share. This behavior, often illegal, aims to replicate the profits of a monopoly. Other oligopolies operate under non-cooperative strategies, engaging in fierce competition. These markets can be described by various models, two of the most prominent being the Cournot and Bertrand models, each with its own set of assumptions and predictions. Cournot competition, quantity as the strategic variable. The Cournot model, developed by the classical economist, posits that firms compete by choosing their output quantities. Imagine two farmers deciding how much wheat to bring to market. Each farmer makes their decision independently, anticipating the other's output. The equilibrium price is then determined by the total quantity supplied. A key element here is the concept of reaction functions. Each firm has a reaction function that describes the optimal output level given the output of its rival. The Cournot equilibrium occurs where these reaction functions intersect, representing a stable point where neither firm has an incentive to change its output. In this model, the market price is above the marginal cost, though not as high as it would be under a monopoly, so profits are possible but limited by rivalry. Bertrand competition, price as the strategic variable. In contrast, the Bertrand model, developed by another influential economist, suggests that firms compete by choosing prices. Again, imagine two shops selling identical items. Consumers will naturally gravitate towards the lower price. The model predicts that, in equilibrium, firms will drive the price down to the marginal cost. This seemingly paradoxical result, known as the Bertrand paradox, suggests that even with only two firms, the market can achieve a competitive outcome resembling perfect competition. It's a stark contrast to the Cournot model, highlighting the importance of the strategic variable being used. Real-world implications in model selection. So, which model best reflects reality? The answer, as is often the case in economics, is that it depends. The Cournot model may be more appropriate for industries where capacity constraints are significant and adjusting output is difficult, such as the aluminum or oil industries. The Bertrand model might be more relevant in markets where firms can easily adjust their prices and where products are highly homogeneous, like some commodity markets. The policymaker, when examining potential antitrust violations, must consider the dynamics of these industries to gauge the potential harm or benefit of proposed mergers. The selection of a model depends on the specific characteristics of the industry in question, including the nature of the product, the cost structure of firms, and the degree of differentiation between products. Conclusion. In conclusion, the oligopoly is a complex and fascinating market structure, characterized by interdependence, barriers to entry, and strategic interaction between firms. The Cournot and Bertrand models provide valuable frameworks for understanding how these firms compete, but their applicability depends on the specific context. As the night deepens, let us ponder a lingering question. How do these models stand up when we introduce product differentiation or dynamic competition over time? These are the topics that will gently guide us in our exploration next time. Yeehaw! Chapter 3. The historical context. Early economic thought on competition, and so, having gently navigated the broader contours of market structures, our attention now drifts, like a feather on a still pond, towards the more nuanced considerations of oligopoly. Specifically, we shall consider two foundational models that offer differing perspectives on the competitive interplay within markets, dominated by a few powerful players, the Cournot and Bertrand models. Imagine, if you will, a placid valley where only a handful of springs supply all the water. The inhabitants rely on these springs, but each spring owner, in essence, a firm in our economic landscape, must decide how much water to draw and sell. This is, in miniature, the essence of oligopoly, a market where the actions of one seller demonstrably impact the others. Unlike the atomistic competition of perfect markets or the singular control of a monopoly, here, strategy and interdependence reign supreme. The Cournot model, named for its intellectual architect, paints a picture of quantity competition. Think of it as a carefully choreographed dance, where each spring owner independently decides how much water to extract, anticipating, as best they can, the decisions of their rivals. The crucial assumption here is that these firms are concerned with quantities. Each firm chooses its output level, taking the output levels of its competitors as given, and the market price then adjusts to clear the total supply. The process unfolds iteratively. One spring owner may initially extract a large volume of water, lowering the price. The other spring owners, observing this, may reduce their own output in response, seeking to maximize their individual profits given the new, lower price. Eventually, a Nash equilibrium is reached, a point where no spring owner can improve their profit by unilaterally changing their water extraction level, given the output levels of the others. Contrast this with the Bertrand model, which shifts the focus from quantity to price. In this scenario, the spring owners compete by setting prices. Consumers, assumed to be perfectly informed and rational, will always purchase from the spring offering the lowest price. If one spring owner sets a price slightly below the others, they will capture the entire market demand. This creates a powerful incentive for price undercutting. The process continues until the price is driven down to the level of marginal cost, the cost of extracting one additional unit of water. At this point, further price cuts would result in losses, and the equilibrium is reached. This outcome, often referred to as the Bertrand paradox, can seem quite striking. Even with just two firms, the market outcome can resemble perfect competition. But, as with all models, it's crucial to understand their limitations and how they translate to the real world. The Cournot model tends to be a better fit for industries where capacity constraints are significant and adjusting output is difficult, like certain raw material industries or sectors with long production lead times. The Bertrand model, on the other hand, may be more applicable when firms can easily adjust prices and have ample capacity to meet demand, as seen in some retail or service industries. However, the real market is rarely as pristine as our models suggest. In practice, firms may differentiate their products through branding, quality, or customer service, allowing them to command prices above marginal cost even in highly competitive industries. Moreover, firms may engage in tacit or explicit collusion, coordinating their prices or output levels to avoid destructive price wars and maximize joint profits. Such collusion, however, is often unstable, as each firm has an incentive to cheat on the agreement and gain a short-term advantage. The implications for policymakers are significant. Understanding the nuances of oligopolistic competition is crucial for designing effective antitrust policies. For instance, interventions designed to prevent collusion or promote competition may be warranted in industries where a few dominant firms wield significant market power. The challenge, however, lies in striking the right balance, fostering competition while also recognizing the potential for economies of scale and innovation that can arise in concentrated markets. As we consider these models, the question lingers: what happens when factors like innovation, technological change, and dynamic competition are introduced? The static nature of these early models provides a solid foundation, but leaves us wanting to know how competition evolves over time, a question we'll explore as our narrative unfolds further, drawing closer to our understanding of modern economic systems and their complexity. Duopoly. The simplest form of oligopoly. Good evening. Welcome back. Last time, we explored the fascinating complexities of monopolistic competition, a market structure characterized by a delicate balance between differentiation and competition. Tonight, we descend a step further down the spectrum of competition, towards a realm where only a few titans roam, the oligopoly. And to begin our exploration of this landscape, we shall focus on its simplest, most elegant form, the duopoly. The duopoly, as the name suggests, is a market dominated by precisely two firms. Think of it as a microcosm of the broader oligopolistic world, allowing us to isolate the key dynamics at play. It provides a fertile ground for exploring the strategic interplay that defines oligopolies, the constant dance between cooperation and competition. Now, within the realm of duopoly, two foundational models stand out, each offering a distinct perspective on how these firms interact. These are the Cournot model and the Bertrand model. Let us begin with the Cournot model. Imagine two water bottlers who have discovered a spring, their only resource. In the Cournot model, these firms independently decide how much water to bottle and sell. The decision each firm makes directly affects the other, because the total quantity of water sold on the market determines the price everyone receives. Each firm, therefore, must anticipate the output decision of its rival when deciding its own production level. In essence, they are playing a quantity-setting game. The end result of this game, the Cournot equilibrium, represents a stable point where neither firm has an incentive to change its output, given the output of the other. Think of it as a delicate balance of supply, a quiet hum of industry. Now, let us shift our gaze to the Bertrand model. Here, the firms, instead of competing on quantity, compete on price. Each firm sets its price, and consumers then decide which firm to buy from. The crucial assumption here is that consumers will always choose the firm offering the lower price. This simple shift in the decision variable, from quantity to price, has profound implications. If one firm sets its price slightly below the other, it captures the entire market. This creates a powerful incentive for both firms to undercut each other, driving prices down towards the marginal cost of production. In the Bertrand model, the equilibrium often resembles the outcome of perfect competition, even though only two firms are present. This is known as the Bertrand paradox. It sounds like a paradox precisely because of its almost contradictory nature, but that contradiction is an artifact of the model's stringent conditions. Both the Cournot and Bertrand models are, of course, simplifications of reality. The classical economist creates these models to isolate key features, much as an artist uses line and color to illuminate a form. In the real world, firms rarely compete solely on quantity or solely on price. They often engage in more complex strategies, combining elements of both, and in addition, they consider other factors such as product differentiation, advertising, and capacity constraints. So, what are the real market implications of these models? Well, the Cournot model often provides a better description of industries where firms have limited capacity or production decisions must be made well in advance, such as in the case of agriculture or commodity production. The Bertrand model, on the other hand, may be more applicable to industries where firms can easily adjust their prices and where products are relatively homogeneous, such as in the case of certain online marketplaces. The policymaker often uses the result of these models as a benchmark to evaluate the market performance. Are firms exercising market power? Are prices higher and quantities lower compared to a situation where markets are more competitive? These models are often used as evidence for policy interventions like antitrust. Ultimately, both models remind us of the powerful forces at play in markets where strategic interaction is paramount. They demonstrate that even with just two players, the dance of competition can lead to a range of outcomes, from near monopoly to near perfect competition. And so, as we contemplate these duopolistic landscapes, we are left with a lingering question. What happens when we move beyond the simple world of two firms? How do the dynamics of oligopoly change as the number of players increases and the complexity of strategic interactions grows? That is the question that awaits us in our next session, a voyage into even deeper waters. Until then, sleep well. Chapter 5. Introducing Antoine Cournot. The founder of oligopoly modeling. Last time, we touched upon the theoretical purity of perfect competition and the stark realities of monopoly. Now we must navigate the more nuanced terrain that lies between these two extremes, the realm of oligopoly. Here, a few firms hold significant market power, each keenly aware of the other's actions. This interdependence creates a fascinating, and often perplexing, dance of strategic decision-making. To understand this dance, we must first acknowledge a pivotal figure, Antoine-Augustin Cournot, arguably the intellectual progenitor of formal oligopoly modeling. Cournot, a 19th-century French mathematician, philosopher, and economist, possessed a mind capable of bridging the abstract and the practical. He wasn't driven by revolutionary zeal, but by a quiet desire to understand how markets functioned under conditions more realistic than those assumed by classical economists. His 1838 book, Researches into the Mathematical Principles of the Theory of Wealth, laid the groundwork for much of what we understand today about competition between a small number of firms. Think of it as a carefully constructed dam, diverting the river of economic thought into new channels. Cournot's primary contribution was a model of quantity competition, now often referred to as the Cournot model. Imagine a market served by only two firms, a duopoly. Each firm independently decides how much to produce, taking into account what they expect the other firm to produce. This expectation is crucial. Each firm operates under the assumption that its competitor's output will remain constant, regardless of its own decision. It's a bit like two farmers deciding how much wheat to plant, each trying to outguess the other without direct communication. They observe the other's fields, assess the climate, and make their best guess. Their decisions impact the overall harvest, and therefore the price, creating a subtle, yet powerful, interdependence. The beauty of Cournot's model lies in its simplicity. He assumed firms compete by choosing quantities simultaneously. Each firm then selects the quantity that maximizes its own profit, given its expectation of the other firm's output. This leads to the concept of a Nash equilibrium in quantities. A Nash equilibrium, in this context, is a situation where neither firm can improve its profit by unilaterally changing its output, given the output of the other firm. They have reached a stable state, a point of balance where the incentives to deviate are absent. The market finds an equilibrium that lies between that of a perfectly competitive market and a monopoly. Now, let's contrast Cournot's quantity competition with an alternative approach, one championed later by Joseph Bertrand. Bertrand argued that firms are more likely to compete on price rather than quantity. In the Bertrand model, firms simultaneously choose prices, and consumers purchase from the firm offering the lowest price. The implications of this seemingly subtle shift are profound. Under Bertrand competition, even with only two firms, the market outcome can resemble perfect competition. If firms are selling identical products and have sufficient capacity to meet demand, the equilibrium price will be driven down to marginal cost. This is because if one firm charges even slightly above marginal cost, the other firm can undercut it and capture the entire market. This price war continues until price equals marginal cost, leaving firms with zero economic profit. It's a ruthless and efficient form of competition, far more cutthroat than Cournot's gentler, quantity-based world. Consider two gas stations across the street from each other, constantly adjusting their prices in response to their competitors' actions. So, which model is more realistic, Cournot or Bertrand? The answer, unsurprisingly, is that it depends. In industries where capacity is limited or difficult to adjust quickly, Cournot's model of quantity competition may be more applicable. Think of large-scale manufacturing plants, where production decisions are made months or even years in advance. Conversely, in industries where capacity can be easily adjusted and where products are relatively homogeneous, Bertrand's model of price competition may be a better fit. Think of online retailers who can easily change prices based on competitor activity. The real market implications of these models are far-reaching. The classical economist might use these models to understand and predict market behavior, while the policymaker might use them to design antitrust regulations aimed at preventing firms from colluding or exercising excessive market power. The choice between a quantity or price competition model dictates the perceived efficiency and potential for regulation. The banker might look to these models to assess the potential profitability of firms operating in oligopolistic industries. Understanding the dynamics of oligopoly is crucial for informed decision-making in a wide range of economic contexts. Cournot's legacy extends far beyond his specific model. He provided a framework for thinking about strategic interaction between firms, a framework that continues to be refined and extended by economists today. He showed us that even simple models can provide valuable insights into complex market phenomena. As we move forward, we must consider: how do factors like product differentiation, repeated interaction, and asymmetric information affect the outcomes predicted by these models? And more importantly, how do firms learn and adapt their strategies in the face of ongoing competition? Chapter 6. Cournot Competition: Assumptions and Core Principles. Welcome back. Last time we explored the spectrum of market structures, journeying from the perfect ideal of perfect competition to the singular dominion of monopoly. Tonight, we settle into the fascinating middle ground, oligopoly. Remember that thread of market power we traced? Here, that power, while not absolute, is certainly concentrated. We begin our exploration of oligopoly with a cornerstone model, Cournot competition. Think of it as a flowing river, its course shaped by the actions of a few key participants. Unlike perfect competition, where individual firms are mere droplets in a vast ocean, in a Cournot oligopoly, the decisions of each firm noticeably alter the river's flow, impacting the others. At its heart, the Cournot model operates under a few key assumptions, the bedrock upon which our understanding is built. First, we assume a limited number of firms are operating in the market, typically more than one but significantly fewer than the multitude found in perfect competition. This limited number grants each firm a degree of market power, the ability to influence price, however small. Second, and critically, each firm independently decides on its quantity of output. Imagine each firm possesses a tap controlling the flow of goods into the market. They each, independently and simultaneously, decide how far to open that tap, determining the quantity they will supply. These decisions are made without explicit collusion, meaning no prearranged agreements or secret handshakes. Third, firms assume their rivals' output will remain constant. This is the crux of the Cournot assumption. Each firm believes its competitors will maintain their current production levels, regardless of the firm's own actions. A simplifying, perhaps naive, assumption, yet powerful in its ability to generate insights. We understand that this is a simplification, but allows a starting point to understand a complex situation. Fourth, and finally, all firms sell a homogeneous product. Think of barrels of crude oil or bushels of wheat, products essentially indistinguishable regardless of their origin. This assumption eliminates the complexities of brand differentiation and perceived quality differences, allowing us to focus on the core dynamics of quantity competition. From these assumptions spring the model's core principles. Each firm aims to maximize its profits, a rational and self-interested pursuit that drives all economic activity. To achieve this, each firm must determine its best response function. This function maps out the optimal quantity a firm should produce, given its belief about the quantity produced by its rivals. It is, in essence, a strategic calculation, a weighing of costs and benefits in the shadow of competition. The beauty of the Cournot model lies in its equilibrium. It settles, theoretically, in a Nash equilibrium, a state where no firm can improve its profit by unilaterally changing its output, given the output levels of the other firms. Think of it as a balanced scale. Each firm is doing the best it can given the actions of its rivals, and no one has an incentive to deviate. This equilibrium is not necessarily the most desirable outcome for society as a whole. It typically results in higher prices and lower output than would be observed under perfect competition. The policymaker, observing this, may consider methods to nudge the system toward greater efficiency. Now, consider the alternative, Bertrand competition. In the Bertrand model, firms compete on price rather than quantity. A subtle shift, but with profound implications. Here, the classical economist observed that even with only two firms, the market could achieve an outcome remarkably close to perfect competition, a result known as the Bertrand paradox. Imagine two identical shops, selling the same goods, fiercely undercutting each other's prices until they reach the marginal cost of production. The result is a near-perfect competitive outcome, which benefits the consumer. The assumption, though, is perfectly substitutable goods and perfect information. The real world, as always, is more complex than these idealized models. Cournot and Bertrand offer contrasting lenses through which to view oligopolistic markets, each highlighting different aspects of firm behavior. Some industries, such as oil production, seem to align more closely with the Cournot model, where capacity constraints and gradual adjustments to output are common. Others, such as airlines or retail gas, may exhibit characteristics of Bertrand competition, where price wars and aggressive undercutting are more prevalent. The true state often requires a hybrid approach, adapting and modifying the models to suit the nuance of the real market situation. But what happens when firms start to anticipate each other's actions, evolving beyond the simple assumption of constant rivals' output? What happens when they start to learn from past behaviors and predict future strategies? We'll explore that question as we move into more dynamic models of oligopoly in our next session. Let that question linger and drift gently into the quiet of the night. Chapter 7. Deriving the Cournot equilibrium, a step-by-step analysis, having gently explored the landscape of oligopoly, a terrain populated by a select few powerful firms, we now turn our attention to a central analytical tool, the Cournot model. Consider this chapter not as a rigid proof, but rather as a carefully guided meditation on strategic interaction. We recall that oligopoly, unlike perfect competition or monopoly, presents a unique tension. Each firm's actions influence the market, and they are acutely aware of each other. The Cournot model, named for the astute observer of economic dynamics, offers a way to understand how firms choose their production quantities when they anticipate the output decisions of their rivals. It's an exercise in predicting the predictable, with a hint of calculated risk. Let us imagine two firms, neatly labeled Firm A and Firm B, operating a market with a single homogeneous product. The demand curve, as usual, slopes downward, reflecting the fundamental principle that higher prices equate to lower quantities demanded. We can express this market demand function as P chia A, BQ, where P is the market price, Q is the total quantity supplied, and A and B are parameters determining the shape of the curve. This foundational element is our starting point, the canvas on which we paint our understanding. Each firm's objective, naturally, is to maximize its profit. Profit, in its simplest form, is revenue minus cost. Let us assume, for the sake of clarity, that each firm has a constant marginal cost, denoted by C. This simplification allows us to focus on the strategic interaction without becoming entangled in intricate cost structures. Thus, the profit of firm can be written as profit at TQA, CQA, TQA, QQA. To maximize this profit, firm must determine the optimal quantity to produce QAA given its anticipation of firm B's output, QBC. The method involves taking the derivative of firm A's profit function with respect to QA, setting it equal to 0, and solving for QOA. This is the familiar process of finding the peak of a curve, the point where the profit is maximized. So we have DDD, QAPIA, BQB, CQPD. 0 solving for QA, we obtain firm A's reaction function, QKA. It tells us, for any given level of output by firm B, what quantity firm A will choose to produce to maximize its own profit. Notice the inverse relationship. The more firm B produces, the less firm A will produce, and vice versa. This is the heart of the strategic interaction. Symmetrically, we can derive firm B's reaction function. If firm A and firm B are indeed symmetrical, then firm B's reaction function is QB2OA. The Cournot equilibrium occurs at the intersection of these two reaction functions. This is the point where both firms are simultaneously playing their best response, given the output of the other firm. Neither firm has an incentive to deviate from this point. It's a state of restful equilibrium, a kind of economic stasis. To find the equilibrium, we must solve the two reaction functions simultaneously. Substituting firm B's reaction function into firm A's, or vice versa, and performing the necessary algebra, we arrive at the equilibrium quantities, QAAA, QBJ. Thus, each firm produces. We can then substitute these quantities back into the market demand function to find the equilibrium price. PGAB, BJA, this equilibrium price lies between the price that would prevail under perfect competition and the price that would prevail under monopoly. The total output is higher than under monopoly, but lower than under perfect competition. The Cournot model, while a simplification of reality, provides valuable insights into the behavior of firms in oligopolistic markets. It demonstrates how firms' strategic interactions lead to outcomes that are neither perfectly competitive nor monopolistic, but somewhere in between, depending on the parameters of the model. The classical economist, observing this, would note the elegant balance achieved. The policymaker might ponder the implications for consumer welfare and the potential for intervention. However, even with this equilibrium established, a question lingers. How might this strategic dance change if firms competed on price rather than quantity? This exploration awaits us, promising a fresh perspective on the dynamics of oligopoly. Chapter 8. Cournot, Reaction Functions. Strategic interactions illustrated, having explored the contours of competitive landscapes and the stark realities of monopoly. We now turn our attention to the intriguing middle ground, oligopoly. Here, a few firms hold significant sway, their decisions intertwined like dancers in a slow, deliberate waltz. Today, we'll illuminate the concept of Cournot competition, a cornerstone of oligopoly theory, using the elegant tool of reaction functions. Imagine two firms, each producing a homogeneous good, perhaps spring water drawn from the same aquifer. The price they receive depends on the total quantity supplied to the market. Each firm must decide how much water to bottle, but their decision isn't made in isolation. It hinges on what they believe their competitor will produce. This interdependence is the heart of strategic interaction. The beauty of the Cournot model lies in its simplicity. We can represent each firm's optimal quantity decision as a function of the other firm's output. These are called reaction functions. Think of them as maps detailing the best course of action for one firm, given the anticipated actions of its rival. For example, if firm A believes firm B will flood the market with water, firm A will likely choose to produce less, mitigating the downward pressure on price. Conversely, if firm A anticipates firm B producing very little, firm A will likely increase its own production to capitalize on the opportunity. The derivation of these reaction functions involves a touch of calculus, but the underlying intuition is straightforward. Each firm aims to maximize its profit, which is revenue minus cost. Revenue, in turn, depends on both the quantity it produces and the market price, which is influenced by the combined output of both firms. By taking the derivative of the profit function with respect to the firm's own output and setting it equal to 0, we find the optimal quantity for that firm, given the other firm's output. This relationship is the reaction function. The Cournot equilibrium is the point where the reaction functions intersect. This represents a stable state where each firm is producing its optimal quantity, given the other firm's production, and neither firm has an incentive to deviate. It's a delicate balance, a point of rest in a dynamic system. It's not the competitive outcome, where price equals marginal cost, nor is it the monopoly outcome, where quantity is restricted to maximize industry profits. Instead, it sits somewhere in between, reflecting the strategic tension between firms. The Cournot model isn't the only game in town when it comes to oligopoly. An alternative, the Bertrand model, assumes firms compete on price rather than quantity. In the Bertrand model, firms set their prices, and consumers choose which firm to buy from. With homogeneous goods, the Bertrand model leads to a surprising outcome. Price competition drives prices down to marginal cost, replicating the perfectly competitive result, even with only two firms. This stark contrast highlights the importance of carefully considering the nature of competition when analyzing oligopoly markets. Which model, Cournot or Bertrand, is more applicable in the real world? The answer, as often in economics, is it depends. The Cournot model is generally more appropriate when firms face capacity constraints or when production decisions take longer to adjust than pricing decisions. Think of large manufacturing plants, for example. The Bertrand model, on the other hand, may be more relevant when firms can easily adjust their prices and when consumers are highly price sensitive. It's important to remember that both Cournot and Bertrand are simplified models. In reality, oligopoly markets are far more complex, involving factors like product differentiation, advertising, and repeated interactions. Firms may engage in tacit collusion, attempting to coordinate their actions without explicit agreements. The policymaker often faces the challenging task of distinguishing between legitimate competition and anti-competitive behavior in these markets. We've explored the strategic landscape of oligopoly through the lens of Cournot competition. But what happens when firms repeatedly interact? Does the shadow of the future influence their current decisions? This is a question we will begin to explore in our next discussion, as we delve into the world of game theory and its applications to the intricate dance of oligopoly. Chapter 9. Analyzing the Cournot model. Profit maximization and output levels. Last time, we painted a broad picture of oligopoly, a market structure residing somewhere between the idealized purity of perfect competition and the singular dominance of monopoly. Now let's gently wade into the analytical depths, focusing specifically on the Cournot model. Think of it as a particular tributary flowing through the larger river of oligopoly theory. The Cournot model, conceived by the classical economist, offers a specific lens through which to understand firm behavior when only a few players exist. Its central tenet is that firms make their output decisions simultaneously, and crucially, they base these decisions on their beliefs about the output levels of their rivals. Imagine two springs feeding a common well. Each spring's owner must decide how much water to draw, anticipating the user's actions. The core of the model lies in the concept of profit maximization. Each firm strives to produce the quantity of output that yields the highest possible profit, given its cost structure and its beliefs about the other firm's output. These beliefs, in the Cournot world, are enshrined in what we call reaction functions. A reaction function, in essence, is a mathematical expression depicting a firm's optimal output level as a function of the output level it expects from its competitor. It's a carefully constructed strategy, a planned response to an anticipated action. To illustrate, suppose we have two firms, Firm A and Firm B, producing a homogeneous good. Firm A, in its quest for maximum profit, formulates a reaction function. This function reveals the optimal quantity for Firm A to produce for every possible quantity that Firm A believes Firm B might produce. The same logic applies to Firm B. The elegant simplicity of the model allows us to trace these decisions to their natural conclusion. The Cournot equilibrium emerges where these reaction functions intersect. Graphically, this is the point where neither firm has an incentive to deviate from its current output level, given the output level of the other firm. It represents a stable point, a balance achieved after each firm has carefully considered its rival's anticipated actions and optimized its own production. This stable point is often referred to as a Nash equilibrium. The equilibrium quantity produced by each firm in the Cournot model will typically be higher than the quantity a monopolist would produce in the same market, but lower than the quantity that would be produced under perfect competition. Consequently, the market price in the Cournot model will be lower than the monopoly price, but higher than the price under perfect competition. It is a middle ground, a compromise between the extremes of market power. While the Cournot model provides valuable insights, it's essential to acknowledge its limitations. The assumption of simultaneous output decisions might not always hold true in reality. In some industries, firms might move sequentially, with one firm acting as a leader and the other as a follower. Furthermore, the model assumes that firms are only competing on output, ignoring other strategic dimensions like pricing, advertising, or product differentiation. Nevertheless, the Cournot model serves as a useful benchmark for analyzing oligopolistic industries. It can help the policymaker understand how market structure influences output levels, prices, and ultimately, consumer welfare. Industries with relatively few players, homogeneous products, and significant barriers to entry often exhibit characteristics consistent with the Cournot framework. Examples might include certain segments of the commodities market, or perhaps some regional cement industries. The key is to apply the model judiciously, recognizing its assumptions and limitations. Having explored the intricacies of quantity competition in the Cournot model, the mind naturally drifts toward an alternative approach: firms competing on price. What happens when firms, instead of choosing their output levels, strategically select their prices, anticipating the prices chosen by their rivals? This is the realm of the Bertrand model, a topic that will unfold in our next exploration, beckoning us further into the fascinating landscape of oligopoly. Chapter 10. Limitations of the Cournot model. Assumptions under scrutiny. Good evening. Last time, we explored the fundamental tenets of the Cournot model, a cornerstone in our understanding of oligopolistic markets. We saw how firms, acting independently and simultaneously, decide on their output levels, anticipating the actions of their rivals. Tonight, however, we must turn a critical eye towards this model. Like any theoretical framework, the Cournot model rests upon certain assumptions, and the strength of its conclusions is directly proportional to the validity of these assumptions. Let us begin with the assumption of homogeneous product. In the Cournot world, all firms produce identical goods. Think of it like a market for simple, undifferentiated commodities. But the real world is rarely so neat. Most markets exhibit at least some degree of product differentiation, whether through branding, perceived quality differences, or even just geographic location. When products are not perfect substitutes, the Cournot model's predictions become less reliable. The power of individual firms to influence market prices grows, and the equilibrium outcomes can shift significantly. This brings us closer to the domain of monopolistic competition, where product differentiation reigns supreme. Another crucial assumption lies in the simultaneous decision-making process. The Cournot model posits that firms choose their output levels at the same time, without knowing their rivals' choices. This is a simplification, of course. In many industries, firms observe each other's actions and react accordingly. Consider a market where one firm consistently acts as a leader, setting its output first, and other firms follow. This sequential decision-making leads to a different model, often referred to as the Stackelberg model. The Stackelberg model allows for a first-mover advantage, where the leader can strategically commit to a higher output level, thereby influencing the followers' choices and securing a larger market share. Furthermore, the Cournot model assumes complete information about market demand and production costs. Each firm is presumed to know the demand curve facing the industry and the cost functions of all its competitors. In reality, such perfect knowledge is rare. Firms often operate under conditions of uncertainty, relying on imperfect information and making decisions based on their best estimates. This imperfect information can lead to errors in judgment and deviations from the Cournot equilibrium. The introduction of Bayesian games, where firms update their beliefs about rivals based on observed actions, offers a more nuanced approach to modeling these situations. Now, let us consider the assumption of static competition. The Cournot model is essentially a one-shot game. Firms make their output decisions once and for all. But markets are dynamic, constantly evolving over time. Firms learn from their experiences, adapt to changing market conditions, and engage in repeated interactions. These repeated interactions can lead to collusion, either tacit or explicit, where firms coordinate their output levels to achieve higher profits. The theory of repeated games provides a framework for analyzing the conditions under which collusion is sustainable, even in the absence of binding agreements. The number of firms is also a significant factor. The Cournot model typically assumes a small number of firms, reflecting the oligopolistic nature of the market. As the number of firms increases, the market becomes more competitive, and the Cournot equilibrium converges towards the perfectly competitive outcome. In the limit, as the number of firms approaches infinity, the Cournot model effectively collapses into a competitive model. This illustrates that the Cournot model is most relevant when the number of firms is relatively small, and each firm has a significant impact on the market price. It is important to remember that these limitations do not invalidate the Cournot model entirely. Rather, they highlight the need for caution when applying it to real-world situations. The Cournot model remains a valuable tool for understanding oligopolistic competition, but it is essential to be aware of its underlying assumptions and to consider alternative models when those assumptions are not met. The classical economist utilizes it as a building block for more complex models. The policymaker uses its predictions as a benchmark, recognizing their likely deviation from observed data. We've touched upon the core assumptions of the Cournot model, each a potential fault line in its applicability to real-world situations. We see how product differentiation, information asymmetry, and dynamic interactions can significantly alter predicted outcomes. This paints a picture of an evolving landscape of economic thought, where models are refined and adapted to better capture the complexities of market behavior. We can't forget that the contrast between the Cournot model, which focuses on quantity competition, and the Bertrand model, which emphasizes price competition, further reveals the richness and nuance of oligopoly theory. As we prepare to conclude, consider this. How do these limitations of the Cournot model pave the way for exploring more nuanced and realistic models of oligopolistic behavior? Models that incorporate elements of game theory, behavioral economics, and network effects. What new lenses do these approaches offer when examining strategic decision-making in concentrated industries? Introducing Joseph Bertrand, a critique of Cournot's approach. Good evening. Last time, we explored the elegant, almost clockwork precision of Cournot's model of oligopoly. Remember the image of two firms, each carefully adjusting their output, seeking an equilibrium point where marginal cost kissed marginal revenue. A model of quantity, measured and controlled. Tonight, however, we turn to a dissenting voice, a challenge to this carefully constructed edifice. We introduce Joseph Bertrand, not just as a name, but as a symbol of a different perspective on how firms interact in a market dominated by the few. He represents a shift in focus, a reevaluation of the very foundations upon which Cournot built his theoretical structure. Think of it as adjusting the lens on a microscope, revealing details previously unseen. Bertrand, a French mathematician and economist, observed that Cournot's emphasis on quantity as the strategic variable was perhaps misplaced. He suggested, instead, that firms in an oligopoly are more likely to compete on price. Imagine, if you will, a marketplace not filled with scales and measuring cups, but rather with price tags, constantly being adjusted in a delicate dance of competitive strategy. Consider this scenario. Two companies, let's call them Company A and Company B, both selling a homogeneous product, say, bottled water. In Cournot's world, they would decide how many bottles to produce. But Bertrand argued that, realistically, they would be more concerned with what price to charge per bottle. After all, If Company A charges a slightly lower price than Company B, it can capture the entire market, leaving Company B with unsold inventory. A tidal wave of demand sweeping toward the lower price. This seemingly subtle shift in perspective has profound implications. In the Bertrand model, the equilibrium outcome is strikingly different from Cournot's. Under certain assumptions, particularly when dealing with homogeneous goods and identical marginal costs, the Bertrand model predicts that firms will drive the price down to marginal cost. This is the same outcome as in perfect competition, even though only two firms are present. A curious paradox, wouldn't you agree? Think of it as a seesaw. Cournot's model has the firms balancing quantities to reach a stable point above marginal cost. Bertrand's model, however, allows the relentless pressure of price competition to push the seesaw down, 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 until it rests firmly at marginal cost. A stark contrast, and a vital lesson in how model assumptions shape our understanding of the world. Now the question naturally arises, which model is correct? Is Cournot's focus on quantity more accurate, or is Bertrand's emphasis on price a better representation of reality? The answer, as is often the case in economics, is it depends. The choice between the Cournot and Bertrand models depends on the specific characteristics of the industry being analyzed. If firms have limited production capacity, or if adjusting output levels is easier than rapidly changing prices, then Cournot's model might be more appropriate. If, on the other hand, firms can easily adjust prices and have ample capacity, then Bertrand's model might offer a more accurate depiction of market dynamics. It is a question of fitting the tool to the task. Further, real-world markets often involve a complex interplay of both quantity and price competition. Firms might compete on price to attract customers in the short term, while simultaneously investing in capacity to increase their market share in the long term. The real world rarely adheres neatly to the simplified assumptions of any single model. It's a dance, a conversation, a constant negotiation between price and quantity, supply and demand. A complex system seeking equilibrium, but never quite achieving it. Therefore, understanding both the Cournot and Bertrand models provides a valuable framework for analyzing oligopolistic markets. They offer different lenses through which to view the same phenomenon, allowing us to appreciate the nuances and complexities of strategic interaction between firms. A tool belt, ready to be deployed depending on the challenges ahead. But this raises an interesting point, doesn't it? Both models, in their basic forms, assume a static environment. What happens when we introduce the dimension of time and consider repeated interactions between firms? What happens when firms learn from each other's behavior and adapt their strategies accordingly? A question to consider as we drift into the next phase of our analysis. Chapter 12. Bertrand, Competition. Focusing on price, not quantity. Yes. We've spent some time considering how firms, in an oligopolistic market, might grapple with the challenge of setting output levels. The Cournot model, you recall, posited a world where companies strategically choose quantities, each anticipating the output decision of its rival. Tonight, however, we shift our focus. Instead of wrestling with quantities, we will explore a different strategic dimension, price. We enter the world of Bertrand competition. Imagine a marketplace, not unlike the ones we've previously considered. Two firms, let's say, produce a homogeneous product, perhaps bottled water or a commodity chemical. Consumers perceive no difference between the offerings of the two companies. The key difference lies in the strategic choice available to these firms. Under Bertrand competition, firms don't choose how much to produce, but rather at what price to sell their product. This shift in strategy has profound implications. Think about the nature of demand. If one firm sets a price slightly lower than its competitor, it captures the entire market. Consumers, indifferent to the product itself, will flock to the lower price. This creates a powerful incentive for firms to undercut each other. Picture this as a delicate balancing act. Each firm is attempting to maximize its profit. It knows that by charging a higher price, it will likely lose all its customers to the competition. On the other hand, continually undercutting the rival erodes profit margins. The question then becomes, What price will prevail in this competitive dance? The surprising, and perhaps unsettling, result is that in Bertrand competition, with homogeneous goods and no capacity constraints, the equilibrium price converges to the marginal cost of production. That is, the price will equal the cost of producing one additional unit of the good. To understand why, consider what happens if the price were above marginal cost. In that scenario, one firm could slightly undercut its rival, capture the entire market, and still earn a profit. This undercutting process continues until the price reaches marginal cost, at which point neither firm has any incentive to lower its price further. A price below marginal cost would lead to losses. This outcome mirrors the perfectly competitive outcome, even with only two firms in the market. It's a remarkable result, often referred to as the Bertrand paradox. It suggests that even a small number of firms, if competing solely on price, can drive prices down to levels that eliminate any economic profit. The classical economist, observing this, might remark on the power of competitive forces, even in seemingly concentrated markets. However, the real world rarely conforms perfectly to the assumptions of the Bertrand model. Several factors can mitigate the intensity of price competition. Product differentiation, even if subtle, can create brand loyalty and allow firms to charge prices above marginal cost. Capacity constraints can also limit a firm's ability to capture the entire market, even if it offers a lower price. Think of a small shop that is offering a 20% discount. Once it is out of product, it cannot continue to satisfy customers. Moreover, repeated interaction among firms, that is, the fact that they compete with each other over time, can lead to tacit collusion, where firms implicitly coordinate to maintain higher prices. So, how do these theoretical models, Cournot and Bertrand, map onto the real world? The policymaker, tasked with promoting competition, needs to understand the nuances of each market. In industries where firms make significant investments in capacity, and where adjusting output levels is difficult, the Cournot model may provide a more accurate representation of firm behavior. In industries where production capacity is more flexible, and where firms can easily adjust prices, the Bertrand model may be more relevant. But even then, the simplifying assumptions of both models must be critically evaluated. The choice between focusing on quantity or price is not always clear-cut. A company's strategic decision often depends on the specific characteristics of its industry, the behavior of its competitors, and the regulatory environment in which it operates. It is a complex, ever-evolving dance. And, like all dances, it can be studied, understood, and even, to some degree, anticipated. But what happens when firms decide that, instead of a dance, a more direct union is desired? We've explored competition, but what of cooperation? As we drift further into this exploration, we must consider the implications of firms merging and forming even larger entities. What new dynamics emerge when competition is reduced and collaboration becomes the dominant force? That is a question for another evening. Sleep soundly. Chapter 13. Deriving the Bertrand equilibrium. The paradoxical outcome. We've explored the Cournot model, a landscape where firms, like careful farmers, decide on output quantities, influencing the market price through their combined actions. Now, let us turn our attention to its counterpart, the Bertrand model, a different yet equally insightful lens through which to view oligopolistic competition. While Cournot focuses on quantities, Bertrand pivots to prices as the strategic variable. Imagine two firms, our duopoly, each possessing the power to set their own price for a homogeneous good. What unfolds is a fascinating game, one that leads us to a seemingly paradoxical conclusion. The core assumption underpinning the Bertrand model is straightforward. Consumers will invariably purchase the good from the firm offering the lowest price. A rational consumer, presented with identical products, will choose the cheaper option. This is the bedrock upon which the entire structure is built. Let us consider the strategic considerations of each firm. They know consumers are price sensitive, and they are aware of their competitors' pricing strategy. Each aims to maximize its profit, and in this context, that maximization is inextricably linked to undercutting the competition. Imagine firm A initially sets a price. Firm B, observing this, has a powerful incentive to set its price slightly lower, just enough to capture the entire market. This, of course, comes at the expense of firm A, which now sells nothing. However, this is not a static situation. Firm A, not willing to accept zero sales, retaliates by setting its price even lower than firm B's. A price war, subtle yet powerful, begins to unfold. Each firm, driven by the desire to claim the entire market, engages in a continuous cycle of price reductions. This cascade continues until a critical threshold is reached. The pivotal point arrives when the price reaches the level of marginal cost. Think of marginal cost as the expense incurred for producing one additional unit. If a firm were to price below this level, it would incur losses on each unit sold. It's like drawing water from a well that's run dry. The effort outweighs the reward. At the marginal cost, both firms are indifferent. They can sell at that price and cover their costs, or they can refuse to sell. There is no incentive to lower the price further, as doing so would lead to unsustainable losses. This equilibrium, where price equals marginal cost, is known as the Bertrand equilibrium. It is a profoundly significant result. It demonstrates that even with only two firms competing on price, the market outcome mirrors that of perfect competition. Recall that in perfect competition, price is also driven down to marginal cost. The surprising implication is that duopoly, under Bertrand's assumptions, can lead to a perfectly competitive outcome. This is the Bertrand paradox. Now, let us pause to consider the implications of this paradoxical result. For the classical economist, observing this outcome, the Bertrand model highlights the intense power of price competition. Even in the presence of limited competition, the drive to capture market share can erode profits and lead to a socially efficient outcome. For the policymaker, the Bertrand model suggests that fostering price competition, even among a few firms, can be beneficial for consumers. However, it's crucial to acknowledge the limitations of the Bertrand model. The assumption of perfectly homogeneous goods is often unrealistic. In reality, products are differentiated by branding, features, or location. This differentiation allows firms to maintain some degree of pricing power. Furthermore, the assumption of simultaneous price setting may not always hold. Firms may engage in repeated interactions, leading to collusion or price leadership, thereby mitigating the intensity of price competition. Consider the real-world implications. While a perfect Bertrand equilibrium might be rare, the underlying principle of fierce price competition is often observed in industries where products are relatively undifferentiated, such as commodities or online marketplaces. The intense price rivalry among airlines, for instance, can sometimes resemble a Bertrand-like scenario. However, even in these markets, factors like brand loyalty, frequent flyer programs, and network effects can dampen the effects of pure price competition. In conclusion, the Bertrand model offers a starkly contrasting perspective to the Cournot model. While Cournot emphasizes the importance of quantity competition and market power, Bertrand highlights the potential for intense price rivalry to drive outcomes towards perfect competition. The Bertrand equilibrium, with its paradoxical result, serves as a reminder that the strategic landscape of oligopoly is complex and multifaceted. As we transition to explore the Stackelberg model, another intriguing approach to competition, we must now ask, what happens when one firm becomes the leader influencing others? What ripple effect do these power dynamics cause in the grand dance of the markets? Price wars and the Bertrand trap. Implications for firms. We've explored the delicate dance of quantity competition, embodied by the Cournot model. Now, let's shift our perspective. Instead of firms vying for market share through production volume, imagine them engaging in a direct confrontation, a battle of prices. This brings us to the Bertrand model and the potentially treacherous waters of price wars. The core difference, as you might intuit, lies in the strategic variable. Cournot assumes firms choose quantities, and the market determines the price. Bertrand, conversely, assumes firms choose prices, and consumers then decide which firm to purchase from, given those prices. The implications of this seemingly simple change are profound. Imagine two firms selling identical products. Consumers, perfectly rational and informed, will naturally gravitate toward the lower price. If both firms set the same price, they split the market. However, If one firm dares to undercut the other, even by a fraction, it captures the entire market demand, at least temporarily. This creates a powerful incentive for each firm to continuously lower its price, hoping to steal all the customers. This competitive pressure continues until price equals marginal cost. This, my friends, is the Bertrand paradox. The classical economist, observing this outcome, might find a certain elegant efficiency. In a duopoly, just two firms, the Bertrand model predicts a price equivalent to that achieved in perfect competition. This is a strikingly different result than Cournot, where even with a small number of firms, prices remain above marginal cost, leading to some degree of market power and deadweight loss. However, the Bertrand model rests on several key assumptions that often fail to hold true in the complexities of the real world. Identical products, perfect information, and no capacity constraints are among the most critical. When these assumptions are relaxed, the Bertrand paradox begins to unravel. Consider product differentiation. If firm A's product is perceived as slightly superior to firm B's, either through branding, quality, or location, it can charge a premium. Consumers are no longer perfectly price sensitive, and a slight price difference may not be enough to sway them completely. This allows firms to escape the relentless downward pressure on prices and maintain profitability. Capacity constraints provide another avenue of escape. If firm A, despite offering a lower price, cannot fulfill the entire market demand, consumers will turn to firm B. This limits the incentive to aggressively undercut, as the undercutting firm cannot fully capitalize on the increased demand. In such situations, a form of implicit collusion can emerge, where firms recognize the limits of their capacity and avoid destructive price wars. Now, let's consider the real-world implications for firms facing this potential Bertrand trap. What strategies can they employ to avoid a race to the bottom? One approach, as we've touched upon, is product differentiation. Creating a unique brand, innovating to offer superior features, or focusing on a niche market can all lessen the intensity of price competition. Another strategy is to build strong customer loyalty. By fostering relationships with customers, providing excellent service, or creating a sense of community around their brand, firms can reduce the price sensitivity of their customer base. Loyal customers are less likely to switch to a competitor simply because of a slightly lower price. Strategic signaling, or tacit collusion, is a more subtle approach. Firms might implicitly communicate their intentions to avoid price wars, perhaps through public statements, or by following each other's pricing moves. However, such behavior is often difficult to prove and can be subject to antitrust scrutiny. The policymaker must be ever vigilant. Commitment to a price is another key element. Finding ways to credibly commit to a certain price, perhaps through long-term contracts or price-matching guarantees, can deter competitors from undercutting. However, these commitments must be carefully considered, as they can also limit a firm's flexibility in responding to changing market conditions. Ultimately, the choice between Cournot and Bertrand depends on the specific industry and the nature of competition. In industries where capacity decisions are made well in advance and are difficult to adjust in the short term, Cournot may be a more appropriate model. In industries where firms can quickly and easily change their prices, Bertrand may be more relevant. But even in industries that seem to favor Bertrand competition, firms are not necessarily doomed to a perpetual price war. By understanding the assumptions of the model and proactively implementing strategies to mitigate its effects, firms can navigate the treacherous waters of price competition and maintain profitability. The goal, of course, is to create a stable, profitable equilibrium where each firm can thrive. But, as economies evolve, what new models will emerge to explain more complex interactions in the marketplace? Contrasting Cournot and Bertrand. Key differences and insights. Welcome, everyone. Last time, we began our exploration of oligopoly, the fascinating landscape where a handful of firms dance a delicate tango of competition and cooperation. Tonight, we delve deeper into two prominent models that illuminate this dance, the Cournot and Bertrand models. Think of them as different lenses through which we examine the same underlying market structure. The choice of lens significantly alters the picture we perceive. Let's begin with a simple narrative landmark. Remember the shared predicament of firms in an oligopoly. Each action they take influences the others. These models attempt to capture this interdependence mathematically. The Cournot model, named after the classical economist, rests on the assumption that firms compete on quantity. Imagine two firms, each independently deciding how much of a homogeneous product to produce. Each firm makes its output decision based on its beliefs about the other firm's output. They treat the rival's output as a fixed quantity, a given constraint within their optimization problem. The equilibrium, known as the Cournot-Nash equilibrium, is where each firm's output is a best response to the others, and neither firm has an incentive to deviate. It is a point of balance, a stable state in the simplified competitive ecosystem. Now, consider the Bertrand model, named after another insightful contributor. Here, the crucial difference lies in the strategic variable. Firms compete on price. Both simultaneously set their price, and consumers purchase from the firm offering the lower price. The product, crucially, remains homogeneous. The resulting equilibrium is often surprising and sharply contrasts with the Cournot outcome. It is here that we begin to see the fascinating divergence. Think of the water flowing down different channels. In the Cournot model, the total output is lower than in a perfectly competitive market, and the price is higher. In essence, the firms exert some degree of market power by restricting output. It is a measured flow, controlled by the individual valves of each firm's production decisions. In the Bertrand model, however, with its assumption of homogeneous products and price competition, the equilibrium price is driven down to marginal cost, the same outcome as in perfect competition. This result, often called the Bertrand paradox, highlights the power of even a duopoly to approximate perfectly competitive outcomes when firms compete fiercely on price. The river rushes freely, unimpeded. The key difference lies in the nature of competition. Quantity competition, as in Cournot, leads to higher prices and lower output than price competition, as in Bertrand. We might ask ourselves, when is one model more appropriate than the other? The answer rests on the characteristics of the specific industry. If firms face capacity constraints and adjusting production is costly or time-consuming, Cournot may be a more realistic representation. If, on the other hand, firms can easily adjust their production levels and prices are readily observable and easily compared by consumers, the Bertrand model may be a better fit. Consider real-world examples. The market for crude oil, where production adjustments are complex and capital-intensive, might be better understood through a Cournot lens. Conversely, online retailers selling standardized goods, where prices are transparent and quickly compared, could be viewed through the Bertrand framework. The policymaker, in considering interventions in oligopolistic markets, must also be aware of these differing dynamics. Regulations designed to promote competition must account for whether firms are primarily competing on quantity or price. A measure that encourages increased output might have a very different effect than one that promotes price transparency. In closing, remember that both the Cournot and Bertrand models are simplifications of complex realities. They provide valuable insights, but should not be applied blindly. The most astute analysis involves understanding the assumptions underlying each model and selecting the one that best reflects the specific characteristics of the market in question. This is the delicate balancing act. The flow must be understood, not merely observed. But if these models are indeed simplified versions of reality, how can we truly model the market when products are not homogeneous? What happens when brands, loyalty, and perceived value come into play? This is the question we will begin to address next time. Good night. Chapter 16. Comparing welfare outcomes. Cournot versus Bertrand. We've gently navigated the intricacies of oligopolistic competition, understanding how a few firms, like islands in a vast ocean, can significantly influence market dynamics. Now, we shift our gaze, not to individual strategies, but to the broader societal impact. We want to understand the welfare consequences, the ripple effects, when firms choose to compete in quantities, the Cournot model, versus when they compete in prices, the Bertrand model. The question before us isn't merely academic. It's fundamentally about how markets serve society. Do these models lead us to a better understanding of the real world? And if so, how can we, as informed observers, nudge the system towards outcomes that benefit the many, not just the few? Let's begin with a familiar benchmark: perfect competition. In this idealized state, countless firms, each a minuscule player, accept the market price as given. The invisible hand guides resources towards their most efficient use, maximizing overall welfare. This is our North Star, the theoretical ideal against which we measure the imperfections of the oligopolistic landscape. Now, consider the Cournot model, where firms decide on their production quantities. Imagine two firms, like two tributaries feeding a river, each deciding how much water to release into the main stream. Each firm's decision affects the total quantity available, thereby influencing the market price. The resulting equilibrium, while stable, falls short of perfect competition. Total output is lower, and the price is higher. This creates a deadweight loss, a portion of potential welfare that vanishes unclaimed, because the market isn't operating at its full potential. The rationale is straightforward. Each firm, acting in its own self-interest, restricts output to drive up the price, knowing that its actions will have a measurable impact on the overall market. This strategic behavior, while rational for the individual firm, collectively reduces societal welfare. It's a classic example of the tension between individual incentives and collective well-being. Contrast this with the Bertrand model, where firms compete on price. Here, the dynamic shifts dramatically. The classical economist described a world in which firms would undercut each other until price equals marginal cost. Imagine two shops, side by side, each trying to lure customers with slightly lower prices. The pressure to undercut the competitor is relentless, driving prices down towards the level seen in perfect competition. In its purest form, the Bertrand model predicts a surprising result. Even with just two firms, the market outcome can mimic the efficiency of a perfectly competitive market. This is known as the Bertrand paradox. However, the Bertrand paradox hinges on several critical assumptions. It assumes that firms have identical costs, that consumers are perfectly informed, and that there are no capacity constraints. When these assumptions are relaxed, the Bertrand outcome becomes less clear-cut. For example, if one firm has a lower cost structure, it can sustain a price advantage. If firms face capacity constraints, they may not be able to satisfy all the demand at the lower price, giving the other firm an opportunity to sell at a higher price. So which model better reflects reality? The answer, inevitably, is nuanced. Some markets, like those for standardized commodities, might resemble the Bertrand model, where price competition is intense. Other markets, characterized by capacity constraints or product differentiation, might be better described by the Cournot model. Consider the airline industry, where capacity constraints are very real, or the soft drink market, where brands invest heavily in differentiating their products. The policymaker, observing these outcomes, must consider these complexities. Antitrust authorities, for example, need to assess the degree of competition in a given market to determine whether intervention is warranted. Mergers that reduce the number of firms in a market might be scrutinized more closely if the market resembles a Cournot setting, where reduced competition is likely to lead to higher prices and lower output. On the other hand, if the market is characterized by fierce price competition, the impact of a merger might be less significant. Understanding the nuances of these models allows us to better appreciate the complexities of real-world markets. It equips us to analyze the potential welfare consequences of different competitive strategies and to design policies that promote greater efficiency and consumer well-being. However, this exploration only scratches the surface of strategic interaction between firms. What happens when firms repeatedly interact with each other over time, learning from past experiences and adapting their strategies? This is the realm of game theory and dynamic competition, a landscape we shall gently traverse in our next exploration. Chapter 17. Introducing Differentiation, a Departure from Homogeneous Goods. Good evening. If you recall from our last session, we explored the somewhat sterile world of perfect competition and the strategic dance within homogeneous oligopolies. We built models where firms, like carefully positioned chess pieces, reacted to one another's output, always seeking equilibrium. But economic reality, like a flowing river, rarely conforms perfectly to our idealized dams and weirs. Tonight, we'll consider a significant deviation: the introduction of product differentiation. Recall the two titans of oligopoly modeling: the model where firms compete on quantity and the model where firms compete on price. These frameworks, though powerful, initially assumed that the goods being offered were interchangeable, identical. Think of raw commodities, say, undifferentiated wheat, or perhaps a pool of oil. But what happens when a company offers something different? Something with a unique brand, a specific feature, a perceived advantage. This is where we move into the realm of product differentiation, a landscape far more common in the real world. Imagine, for a moment, two purveyors of caffeinated beverages. One sells a standard, no-frills coffee. The other offers an artisanal blend, ethically sourced, with customized roasting profiles and barista-crafted presentation. While both quench the same thirst, their appeals, and thus their competitive dynamics, are fundamentally altered. This is the essence of product differentiation. When goods are differentiated, the classical price competition model, where firms undercut each other until price reaches marginal cost, often breaks down. If one coffee shop reduces its price slightly, it won't necessarily capture the entire market. Consumers have preferences. They value the artisanal blend, or perhaps the convenience of the other shop. This allows firms to maintain positive profit margins even in competitive environments. The race to the bottom becomes a more measured stroll. Furthermore, product differentiation blurs the lines between the models. The classical economist who favored quantity competition envisioned firms setting output levels. With differentiated goods, firms may still consider their production volumes, but their choices are now intertwined with pricing strategies and marketing efforts. Imagine a car manufacturer deciding not only how many SUVs to produce, but also what features to include, what advertising campaign to launch, and how to price each model. Consider, for instance, the smartphone market. Each manufacturer crafts a distinct product with different operating systems, camera technologies, and design aesthetics. The interplay between these features and their pricing determines each firm's market share. A cut in price by one firm may attract some consumers, but others will remain loyal to their preferred brand, their favorite features, or the perceived status associated with a particular product. The policymaker, when evaluating markets with differentiated goods, must therefore adopt a more nuanced perspective. Simply observing a few firms controlling a large market share isn't enough to conclude that anti-competitive behavior is occurring. The degree of substitutability between products, the barriers to entry, and the dynamic nature of innovation all play crucial roles. Antitrust investigations in these industries often involve complex analyses of consumer preferences, brand loyalty, and the potential for new entrants to disrupt the established order. The effect of product differentiation extends beyond pricing and output decisions. It also impacts innovation. Firms are incentivized to constantly improve their products, to create new features, and to differentiate themselves further from their rivals. This continuous innovation, while potentially leading to obsolescence for some, also benefits consumers through a wider range of choices and improved products. It's a dynamic ecosystem, perpetually seeking a new, albeit temporary, equilibrium. The introduction of differentiation represents a departure from the simpler models we first encountered. It acknowledges the richness and complexity of consumer preferences, the power of branding, and the role of innovation in driving market dynamics. It also requires a more sophisticated analytical toolkit for both firms and policymakers. We have seen the models shift as we introduce more complex situations. Now we must ask, what other factors cause our models to be adjusted? What if firms were not competing, but actively cooperating? Horizontal and vertical product differentiation. Understanding the spectrum tonight, we turn to the nuanced realm of product differentiation, a gentle spectrum stretching between the perfectly uniform and the distinctly unique. Recall the rigid structures we've observed, where competition seemed to hinge solely on quantity or price. Now, imagine adding the subtle brushstrokes of consumer preference, imbuing each product with its own character. This is where horizontal and vertical differentiation enter the picture, concepts that soften the stark edges of pure oligopoly models, bringing them closer to the pulse of the real world. Consider first horizontal differentiation. Think of it as variations across a flat plane. Here, consumers have differing tastes, but no universal agreement on which product is inherently better. Some prefer the robust flavor of one coffee blend, while others favor the mellow notes of another. Both products exist at roughly the same quality level, appealing to different segments of the population. This is about subjective preference. The classical economist understood this instinctively. Utility isn't a universal constant, but a personal evaluation. He observed that even if all firms charged the same price, some consumers would still choose one product over another based purely on taste. Vertical differentiation, on the other hand, implies a hierarchy. Imagine a series of steps, each leading to a product perceived as objectively superior. A high-end luxury car, for example, is vertically differentiated from a basic economy car. Most consumers, if price were no object, would prefer the luxury car. The difference lies not simply in taste, but in quantifiable attributes: performance, features, materials. The policymaker must grapple with this daily, considering how regulations might inadvertently favor or hinder producers in the vertical spectrum. Should safety regulations focus on minimum standards applicable to all, or should they encourage innovation at the upper echelons of product design? Now, consider how these forms of differentiation impact our familiar Cournot and Bertrand models. In a Cournot setting, where firms compete on quantity, the introduction of horizontal differentiation allows each firm to carve out a niche. This softens the cutthroat nature of pure quantity competition. Imagine two coffee roasters, each producing slightly different blends. They may still be sensitive to each other's output, but they won't be driven to the point of suicidal production increases, because they each cater to a loyal base of customers who appreciate their unique offering. A stable equilibrium emerges, characterized by positive profit margins. The Bertrand model, with its price-based competition, is even more dramatically affected by product differentiation. Recall the Bertrand paradox. If products are perfect substitutes, competition drives prices down to marginal cost, eliminating profit. However, with even a slight degree of horizontal differentiation, this paradox dissolves. If consumers perceive even a small difference between two products, firms gain some pricing power. They can raise prices slightly, without losing all their customers to the competitor. This gives rise to price competition with differentiated products, a more realistic scenario than the stark, all-or-nothing outcome of the classic Bertrand model. Real-world markets almost always feature a blend of both horizontal and vertical differentiation. Think of the smartphone market. Some consumers are drawn to a particular operating system, while others prioritize processing power and camera quality. Firms compete on multiple dimensions, vying for market share across a complex landscape of consumer preferences. Understanding the interplay between horizontal and vertical differentiation is crucial for both firms and policymakers. For firms, it informs product development strategies, pricing decisions, and marketing campaigns. For policymakers, it helps assess the impact of regulations on competition and consumer welfare. A regulation that favors a particular type of product design, for example, might inadvertently stifle innovation or reduce consumer choice. As we drift towards our conclusion, consider this: product differentiation isn't static. It's a dynamic process, constantly evolving as firms innovate and consumers adapt. What are the next emergent dimensions along which products will differentiate themselves? This ongoing evolution shapes the markets of tomorrow and forms the bedrock of our next exploration: the strategic choices firms employ to solidify their market positions. Chapter 19. Cournot with differentiated products, refining the model. Welcome back. Last time we delved into the essential mechanics of the Cournot model, observing how firms acting independently navigate the treacherous waters of quantity competition. Tonight, we'll refine our understanding, moving beyond the idealized world of homogeneous goods to grapple with the complexities of differentiated products within a Cournot framework. Imagine, if you will, a landscape not of identical springs, but of slightly varying mineral content, each spring possessing a unique allure. Our starting point remains rooted in the core Cournot assumption. Firms choose output levels simultaneously. However, instead of assuming that all firms produce an identical product, we acknowledge that consumers may perceive meaningful differences between the goods offered by each firm. This differentiation could arise from variations in quality, branding, location, or even perceived value. Think of the market for automobiles, or perhaps coffee. Each brand possesses a distinct identity, a unique appeal to a segment of the consumer base. The key change lies in the demand functions. Instead of a single market demand curve that dictates the price based on the aggregate quantity supplied, each firm now faces its own demand curve. This demand curve depends not only on its own output, but also on the output levels of its rivals. The more a rival produces, the lower the price your product can command, and vice versa. This introduces a layer of strategic interdependence that is richer and more nuanced than in the homogeneous goods case. Consider two firms, each producing a slightly different brand of bottled water. Firm A's demand might be expressed as PAE, B KA, C KB, where PA is the price of firm A's water, KA is its quantity, QB is the quantity produced by firm B, and A, B, and C are parameters. The parameter C captures the degree of substitutability between the two brands. If C is large, the products are close substitutes, and firm B's output has a substantial impact on firm A's price. If C is small, the products are weakly substitutable, and firm B's output has a minimal effect. Each firm, as before, aims to maximize its profits. The classical economist would remind us that profits are simply total revenue minus total costs. Revenue for each firm is now P Chi Quai, where I denotes the firm. The introduction of product differentiation alters the best response functions. Instead of simply reacting to the aggregate output of all other firms, each firm now strategically anticipates the individual output decisions of its rivals, weighing the impact of their choices on its own price and demand. This leads to a Nash equilibrium in quantities, where no firm can unilaterally increase its profit by altering its own output, given the output levels of its competitors. Let's pause a moment and consider the implications. Differentiated products soften the intensity of competition. The price elasticity of demand facing each firm is lower than in the homogeneous goods case. This allows firms to exercise a greater degree of market power, charging higher prices and earning higher profits than they would if their products were perfect substitutes. The policymaker might be interested in this as it influences how we evaluate market welfare. The Bertrand model, another prominent oligopoly model, posits firms compete on price rather than quantity. The contrast between Cournot and Bertrand highlights the crucial role of the strategic variable. When products are homogeneous, Bertrand competition leads to a drastically different outcome. Price competition drives prices down to marginal cost, eliminating profits. However, with differentiated products, the Bertrand outcome is less stark. Firms still face downward sloping demand curves and retain some degree of market power, even when competing on price. The real world, of course, rarely conforms perfectly to either the Cournot or Bertrand model. Industries often exhibit elements of both quantity and price competition. Firms may invest in capacity and then engage in price rivalry. Understanding the interplay between these two forms of competition is crucial for analyzing the strategic behavior of firms in oligopolistic markets. Think of airlines simultaneously managing seat capacity and fluctuating ticket prices. As we refine our models, we move closer to capturing the richness and complexity of real-world markets. The Cournot model, with differentiated products, represents a significant step in that direction, allowing us to analyze industries where firms compete strategically, offering goods that are similar, yet not identical. The water is still flowing, but is it becoming clearer? Tonight, we've explored the nuanced world of differentiated products within the Cournot framework. As we move forward, consider this. How does the degree of product differentiation, the extent to which consumers perceive differences between goods, affect the stability and efficiency of oligopolistic markets? This question will guide us as we delve deeper into the intricate dance of strategic interaction between firms. Good night. Chapter 20. Bertrand, with differentiated products. Mitigating the price war. Welcome back to our quiet corner of economic thought. Last time, we explored the intricacies of Cournot competition, where firms strategically chose their quantities, a dance of supply and demand. Now, let us shift our focus, drifting, as it were, from quantity towards price. We enter the realm of Bertrand competition, and, more specifically, a realm where the sharp edges of price wars are softened by the nuance of differentiated products. Imagine, if you will, two firms, poised like chess pieces, each contemplating their next move. But instead of choosing quantities, as in Cournot, they now choose prices. In its simplest form, the Bertrand model predicts a rather stark outcome, a relentless race to the bottom. If both firms are selling perfectly identical products, consumers, being rational actors in our model, will invariably flock to the firm offering the lower price. This, in turn, forces the other firm to undercut, and so the cycle continues, until price equals marginal cost. A seemingly efficient outcome, but one that leaves both firms earning zero economic profit. A rather bleak picture indeed. But the real world, as we know, is rarely so perfectly aligned with theoretical ideals. Products, even those ostensibly similar, rarely possess perfect substitutability. Consumers have preferences, brand loyalties, perceived differences in quality, or simply the convenience of one retailer over another. This, the subtle but significant element of product differentiation, throws a wrench into the gears of the unrelenting Bertrand price war. Consider the example of two coffee shops, nestled perhaps on opposite corners of a bustling city street. Both sell coffee, yes, but their blends might differ slightly. Their ambience might appeal to different demographics. One might offer faster service, the other, a more expansive menu. These seemingly minor distinctions create a space, a buffer, that mitigates the pure price-driven competition. A consumer might be willing to pay a slightly higher price at one shop if they perceive it to offer a superior experience, or if they have grown accustomed to its particular brew. With differentiated products, the demand functions for each firm become intertwined, but not perfectly so. If one firm raises its price, some consumers will switch to the competitor, but not all. A portion of the consumer base will remain loyal, either due to genuine preference or inertia. This softening of the demand curve allows each firm to exercise a degree of market power, enabling them to set prices above marginal cost and earn positive profits. The mathematics of this model, while not our primary focus tonight, involves solving for reaction functions, similar to Cournot, but now in the realm of prices. Each firm's optimal price is a function of the price set by its competitor. These reaction functions, when plotted, intersect at a Nash equilibrium, a point where neither firm has an incentive to unilaterally deviate from its current pricing strategy. Now, let's consider the real market implications of this refined Bertrand model. We see examples of differentiated product competition everywhere. The airline industry, where frequent flyer programs and route networks create differentiation. The smartphone market, where operating systems and brand image play a significant role. And even the humble bottled water market, where branding and perceived purity can command premium prices. Differentiation can arise from a variety of sources. Horizontal differentiation, based on subjective preferences, and vertical differentiation, based on objective quality differences. A firm can actively invest in differentiation through advertising, product development, and brand building. This investment, while costly, can be a worthwhile strategy if it allows the firm to command higher prices and earn sustainable profits. It is important to note, however, that the degree of differentiation matters greatly. The more similar the products, the fiercer the competition. If the coffee shops on opposite corners begin to offer identical blends and experiences, the price war will inevitably intensify. The key is to find a niche, a unique selling proposition that resonates with a specific segment of the consumer market. The interplay between Cournot and Bertrand models, with and without differentiation, provides a rich tapestry of competitive dynamics. The classical economist observing this intricate dance might ponder which model best captures the essence of a particular industry. The policymaker, meanwhile, must grapple with the implications of these models for consumer welfare and antitrust enforcement. High levels of differentiation can lead to higher prices, but they can also incentivize innovation and product variety. Striking the right balance, navigating the complexities of market power and consumer choice remains a perpetual challenge. As we prepare to transition to our next exploration, consider this. How does the dynamic of product differentiation shift when firms begin to collude, either explicitly or tacitly, to manage prices? What new strategies emerge in this altered landscape? A question to ponder as we drift towards our next topic. Chapter 21. The Role of Product Differentiation in Market Power. Welcome back. Our journey through the landscape of imperfect competition has brought us to the foothills of market power, specifically within oligopolies. Last time, we explored the general characteristics of these markets, where a few firms hold considerable sway. Tonight, we delve into the critical role of product differentiation in shaping that power. Think of it as adding texture to a plain landscape, creating niches and pathways for individual firms to thrive. The fundamental challenge in understanding oligopolies lies in modeling the strategic interaction between firms. Two dominant models, Cournot and Bertrand, offer contrasting perspectives. These models, like lenses, refract the reality of strategic decision-making. The Cournot model, named after the insightful mathematician, focuses on quantity competition. In this scenario, firms independently decide how much to produce, and the market price adjusts to clear the total supply. Imagine each firm controlling a valve, regulating the flow of a vital resource into a common pool. Each firm observes the other's flow and adjusts its own accordingly. Bertrand competition, on the other hand, centers on price competition. Here, firms simultaneously set prices, and consumers choose which firm to buy from, typically favoring the lower price. Think of this as a delicate balancing act, each firm trying to undercut the other, carefully avoiding setting a price so low that it jeopardizes profits. In its purest form, with identical products, Bertrand competition leads to a surprising outcome. The price converges to the marginal cost of production, essentially mimicking perfect competition. This is known as the Bertrand paradox. However, the real world rarely presents us with perfectly homogeneous goods. This is where product differentiation enters the picture. It acts as a buffer, a cushion against the relentless downward pressure of price competition. When products are differentiated, even slightly, consumers may have preferences that go beyond just price. They might value brand loyalty, specific features, or even simply the convenience of one supplier over another. Consider the beverage market. While many sodas quench thirst, brands cultivate distinct identities. This differentiation allows firms to command a price premium, even when alternatives exist. The policymaker, when regulating these types of markets, must therefore consider not just market share, but also the degree of product differentiation. A firm with a large market share selling a highly differentiated product may wield significantly more market power than a firm with a similar share selling a commodity. The implication for our Cournot versus Bertrand debate is profound. In a Cournot setting, product differentiation tends to soften competition, allowing firms to sustain higher prices and profits. The degree of this softening depends on how strongly consumers perceive the products as different. If brands are very similar, the Cournot outcome will approach the competitive result. However, strong branding can create a comfortable space for profit. In the Bertrand world, differentiation also weakens the intense price rivalry. With differentiated products, firms no longer need to relentlessly undercut each other. They can instead focus on appealing to their specific niche of consumers, charging prices that reflect the perceived value of their unique offerings. Think of local coffee shops. Each can survive in close proximity, catering to subtly different tastes and desires. In essence, product differentiation transforms the competitive landscape from a zero-sum game to one where firms can coexist and prosper by carving out their own identities. It shifts the focus from simply undercutting rivals to building brand loyalty and offering unique value propositions. Classical economists might argue that this ultimately benefits consumers as well, by providing them with a wider array of choices tailored to their individual needs and preferences. The real-world implications are widespread. Consider the automobile industry. While cars fundamentally provide transportation, manufacturers fiercely compete on features, styling, and performance, all forms of product differentiation. This differentiation allows firms to maintain pricing power and invest in innovation, constantly striving to create products that stand out in a crowded market. The ongoing puzzle, however, rests in quantifying differentiation. How do we accurately measure the degree to which consumers perceive products as distinct? And how can we predict the strategic responses of firms when facing new forms of differentiation? These are questions that will linger as we consider further strategies in the economic game. Chapter 22. Strategic Commitments. Shaping the competitive landscape, we've explored the foundational principles of market structures, from the idealized purity of perfect competition to the singular dominance of monopoly. Now, we find ourselves in a more nuanced terrain, oligopoly, a space where a few significant players shape the landscape, their decisions intertwined, their fortunes dependent on understanding not just their own costs and demands, but the anticipated actions of their rivals. Think of it as a delicate dance, a game of strategic commitment where each move ripples outward, influencing the overall equilibrium. The heart of understanding oligopoly lies in grasping the interdependence. It's a system where firms possess significant market power, but none commands absolute control. Their choices, especially regarding output and price, become strategic levers. And it's here that the contrasting visions of two cornerstone models, Cournot and Bertrand, offer profoundly different perspectives. Imagine for a moment two firms operating in the same market, offering a similar product. In the Cournot model, firms simultaneously decide how much quantity to produce. Each firm's decision is based on its beliefs about the other firm's output. Essentially, each firm develops a reaction function, a mathematical expression predicting its optimal output level given the anticipated output of its competitor. The equilibrium, the point of stability, arises where both firms' reaction functions intersect. This intersection represents a state where neither firm has an incentive to deviate given the other's output. We can picture it as a pond, a state where the surface is calm with no immediate disturbances. Now, contrast this with the Bertrand model. Here, the strategic variable isn't quantity but price. Each firm simultaneously sets a price, aiming to capture as much market share as possible. The crucial assumption is that consumers will purchase from the firm offering the lowest price. This seemingly simple shift in the decision variable leads to a dramatically different outcome. In the Bertrand model, the equilibrium tends to be a price equal to marginal cost. This result, often called the Bertrand paradox, suggests that even with just two firms, competition can drive prices down to levels mirroring perfect competition. The classical economist might be surprised, but consider the implications. If one firm charges even slightly above marginal cost, the other can undercut it, capturing the entire market. This creates a relentless pressure to reduce prices. So, which model, Cournot or Bertrand, better reflects real-world oligopolistic behavior? The answer, as is often the case in economics, is it depends. The Cournot model is more appropriate when firms face capacity constraints, making it difficult to rapidly adjust output levels. Consider the market for airline travel. Airlines cannot instantly add or subtract flights. Their capacity is relatively fixed in the short run, making output a more relevant strategic variable. Conversely, the Bertrand model is more applicable in situations where firms can easily adjust their production levels to meet demand at a given price. Think of software companies. The marginal cost of producing an additional copy of software is virtually zero. Price becomes the dominant strategic weapon. The real market implications are far-reaching. The policymaker must understand these dynamics when evaluating mergers and acquisitions, designing antitrust regulations, and assessing the competitive landscape of various industries. A merger in a Cournot-type market might lead to significant price increases and reduced output, warranting closer scrutiny. In a Bertrand-type market, the impact might be less pronounced due to the inherent competitive pressure to keep prices low. The landscape is complex. Strategic commitments also play a crucial role. Firms might invest heavily in research and development to lower their marginal costs, thereby gaining a competitive advantage in a Bertrand market. They might build excess capacity to deter entry by potential competitors, signaling a willingness to aggressively defend their market share. These actions, observable and tangible, are commitments, signaling intentions and shaping expectations. But even with sophisticated models, the human element persists. Behavioral economics reminds us that firms don't always act perfectly rationally. Emotions, biases, and incomplete information can influence decision-making. Trust, reputation, and long-term relationships can mitigate the cutthroat competition predicted by the basic Bertrand model. Consider how businesses often compete by differentiating services instead of simply undercutting prices. As we conclude this chapter, consider this. How might the rise of digital platforms and network effects reshape the oligopolistic landscape? Are we entering a new era where the traditional models of Cournot and Bertrand are becoming less relevant, replaced by dynamics driven by data, algorithms, and the power of interconnectedness? This is a question for the next phase of our journey. Chapter 23. First Mover Advantage. The Stackelberg Model. Welcome back. Last time, we explored the nuanced dance of firms within Cournot's model, each simultaneously choosing their output in response to the anticipated actions of their rivals. A delicate balance, reflecting a kind of strategic interdependence. Tonight, we gently shift our gaze to a variation on this theme, a scenario where the playing field isn't quite so level. We venture into the realm of the Stackelberg model, a study in first-mover advantage. The Cournot model, with its simultaneous decision-making, implicitly assumes a symmetry of power and information. All firms react to each other at the same time, like dancers responding to the same musical phrase. But what happens when one firm, through foresight or sheer dominance, gets to move first? This is the question at the heart of the Stackelberg model. Imagine a duopoly, two firms competing in the same market. However, one firm, let's call them the leader, possesses the capability to commit to an output level before the other firm, the follower, makes their decision. The leader knows that the follower will observe their output and then choose their own output to maximize profit, given the leader's choice. This alters the strategic calculus dramatically. The leader isn't just reacting, they're shaping the very landscape upon which the follower must operate. The leader understands the follower's best response function, that mathematical relationship detailing how the follower will react to any given output level from the leader. The leader can, therefore, incorporate the follower's reaction directly into their own profit maximization problem. It's a bit like a chess player anticipating several moves ahead, understanding not just their own options, but also how their opponent will respond. The result is, unsurprisingly, a higher profit for the leader compared to the Cournot equilibrium. By strategically choosing a larger output, the leader effectively constrains the follower's choices, capturing a larger share of the market and extracting more consumer surplus. The follower, forced to react to the leader's committed output, ends up producing less and earning a lower profit. The dynamic is no longer a symmetrical dance, but a directed flow, with the leader shaping the course. Contrast this with the Bertrand model, where firms compete on price rather than quantity. In the Bertrand scenario, even a slight price advantage can capture the entire market, leading to intense competition and often driving prices down to marginal cost. A first-mover advantage is far less pronounced in the Bertrand world. The inherent nature of price competition, its swift and decisive nature, leaves little room for strategic commitment and preemptive moves. The real-world implications of the Stackelberg model are profound. Consider industries with a dominant player and smaller, less influential firms. Think of a large technology company setting standards that other companies must adhere to, or a major retailer dictating terms to its suppliers. These are often Stackelberg-like situations, where the dominant firm exercises its first-mover advantage to shape the market to its benefit. However, it's crucial to remember that the Stackelberg model rests on certain assumptions. It assumes that the leader can credibly commit to their output level, and that the follower correctly observes this commitment. If the leader can't credibly commit, or if the follower doesn't believe the commitment, the model breaks down. Furthermore, the follower must know that the leader will move first and behave according to rational expectations. These are crucial prerequisites for the model to hold. In practice, maintaining a first-mover advantage is an ongoing challenge. Competitors will constantly strive to innovate, disrupt, and challenge the leader's position. The leader must, therefore, be vigilant, adaptable, and continually invest in maintaining its competitive edge. The flow of the market is not static. It's a constant ebb and flow of competitive pressures. The classical economist might observe that advantages, like monopolies, are eroded over time by the forces of market competition. Before we conclude, let's consider this. We've explored models where firms compete on quantity and models where they compete on price. But what happens when firms have the ability to collude, to explicitly coordinate their actions rather than compete? How does the possibility of collusion reshape the market landscape? That's a question we'll gently explore in our next session. Until then, may your thoughts drift softly on the currents of economic theory. Chapter 24. Capacity Constraints. Modifying the Bertrand Outcome. Good evening. We've spent time exploring the elegant, almost crystalline, world of perfect competition and its somewhat more complex cousin, the Cournot model of oligopoly. Now, let's turn our attention to another fascinating scenario within the oligopolistic landscape, the impact of capacity constraints on the Bertrand model. We touched on Bertrand's price-driven competition, but tonight we'll delve into how it changes when firms aren't able to produce as much as they'd like. Remember, the beauty, and perhaps the brutality, of the original Bertrand model lies in its assumption of unlimited capacity. Firms stand ready, poised to meet any level of demand at their chosen price. This, as we discussed, often leads to a rather startling conclusion: price wars, driving prices down to marginal cost, and effectively mimicking perfect competition, even with just two firms. But what happens when this idealized assumption crumbles? What happens when firms can't simply produce an infinite amount of their goods? Imagine two competing breweries, each capable of producing only a limited number of barrels of beer each week. The Bertrand model, in its purest form, would suggest that if one brewery slightly undercuts the other's price, it will capture the entire market. However, if that brewery only has enough capacity to supply, say, half the market at that lower price, the story changes dramatically. The other brewery, even at the higher price, will still be able to sell its beer to the customers who remain unsatisfied. This scenario introduces what economists often call a capacity constraint. It's a simple, yet profound, restriction that fundamentally alters the dynamics of price competition. The sharp, decisive outcome of Bertrand softens, replaced by a more nuanced interaction. Prices no longer necessarily plummet to marginal cost. Instead, they often settle at a level higher than that predicted by the original Bertrand model. The classical economist, observing this, might point out that capacity constraints introduce an element of market power, even in a seemingly competitive situation. If a firm knows that its competitor cannot fully satisfy the demand at a lower price, it has less incentive to engage in aggressive price cutting. It can afford to maintain a higher price, knowing that some consumers will still choose to buy its product. The level at which prices settle depends on several factors, including the size of the capacity constraints relative to the market demand, the cost structures of the firms, and even the degree to which consumers are willing to switch between brands. If capacity is severely limited and demand is high, the price may approach what is known as the monopoly price, the price that a single, unconstrained firm would charge to maximize its profits. Consider a more contemporary example: the market for semiconductors. During periods of high demand, production capacity can become a critical bottleneck. Even if several semiconductor manufacturers exist, the constraints on their output can drive up prices significantly, impacting the cost of everything from smartphones to automobiles. The policymaker, witnessing this, might consider investments in expanding production capacity to alleviate price pressures and foster greater competition. The inclusion of capacity constraints makes the Bertrand model more realistic and applicable to many real-world markets. It helps explain why we often observe prices above marginal cost, even in situations where there are multiple firms competing. It highlights the strategic importance of capacity planning and investment decisions. Furthermore, it demonstrates how seemingly minor modifications to the underlying assumptions of a model can lead to significantly different outcomes. The assumption of unlimited capacity, so central to the original Bertrand model, is often a simplification that obscures the complexities of actual markets. Once we relax this assumption, we gain a more accurate and insightful understanding of how firms compete and how prices are determined. So as you drift off, consider this. How does the presence of differentiated products further complicate the interplay between price and capacity in oligopolistic markets? That, perhaps, is a question for another evening. Good night. Chapter 25. Repeated Games and Collusion. The Shadow of the Future. Last time, we touched upon the static games that describe the competitive landscape, the one-shot encounters. Tonight, we delve into the realm of repeated games, a world where actions have consequences beyond the immediate present. Specifically, we'll be exploring how this dynamic shapes oligopoly models, contrasting the Cournot and Bertrand approaches, and reflecting on their real-world implications. Think of it as observing the long, slow dance of firms, each step influencing the next. Consider the oligopoly, a space where a few dominant firms hold sway, each acutely aware of the other's actions. In this context, the lure of cooperation, of tacit collusion, is strong. Individually, firms might recognize that restricting output and inflating prices would benefit all involved. But the inherent instability of such an agreement arises from the temptation to cheat, to deviate, and grab a larger slice of the profit pie. This is where the concept of repeated games becomes crucial. The shadow of the future, the anticipation of future interactions, profoundly alters the strategic landscape. The classical economist, observing this potential for collusion, wondered how stability might be achieved. One model, the Cournot model, assumes firms compete by choosing quantities. Each firm decides how much to produce, knowing that the market price will be determined by the total supply. In a one-shot game, this often leads to a result somewhere between perfect competition and monopoly, a suboptimal equilibrium for the firms involved. However, in a repeated game, a different dynamic emerges. Firms can implicitly threaten each other with retaliation. If one firm increases its output, the others can respond by doing the same, driving down the price and hurting everyone. This prospect, this credible threat, can sustain a collusive agreement, even without explicit communication. Contrast this with the Bertrand model, where firms compete by setting prices. In a one-shot Bertrand game with identical products, the equilibrium price is driven down to marginal cost, a fiercely competitive outcome. But again, the prospect of future interaction changes the game. Firms can implement strategies that punish price cutting. If one firm lowers its price, the others can match it, triggering a price war that erodes profits for everyone. The potential for such retaliation acts as a deterrent, allowing firms to maintain higher prices and enjoy increased profits over time. The key here is the credibility of the threat, the belief that firms will actually follow through with their retaliatory actions if deviations occur. These models, the Cournot and the Bertrand, are powerful theoretical tools, yet their real-world implications are complex. The degree to which firms can sustain collusion depends on several factors. The frequency of interaction is paramount. The more often firms interact, the greater the opportunity for retaliation and the stronger the shadow of the future. The transparency of the market also plays a role. If firms can easily monitor each other's actions, deviations from a collusive agreement are more likely to be detected and punished. Furthermore, the stability of the market environment matters. In volatile markets, where demand and costs are constantly changing, it is more difficult for firms to coordinate and maintain a collusive agreement. The policymaker, tasked with ensuring market efficiency, must navigate this complex terrain. Antitrust laws are designed to prevent explicit collusion, such as price-fixing agreements. But tacit collusion, the kind that emerges from repeated interaction and strategic behavior, is more difficult to detect and prosecute. Regulators often look for patterns of coordinated behavior, such as parallel pricing, that suggest firms are implicitly cooperating. The effectiveness of these policies hinges on a deep understanding of the dynamics of repeated games and the factors that influence the sustainability of collusion. We must ask ourselves, how do we distinguish genuine competition from subtly coordinated action? Ultimately, the study of repeated games and collusion highlights the enduring tension between cooperation and competition in oligopolistic markets. The shadow of the future, the anticipation of future interactions, creates both the opportunity for collusion and the threat of retaliation. This tension shapes the behavior of firms and the structure of industries, demanding careful observation and thoughtful policy interventions. Consider the subtle dance of airlines, the pricing strategies of gasoline stations on opposite corners, even the unspoken agreements within professional sports. These are all arenas where the principles we've discussed tonight are at play. As we conclude, let us contemplate. What role does trust, or rather, the lack thereof, play in shaping these repeated interactions? And how does this influence the evolution of market structures over the very long term? Tacit collusion. Understanding implicit agreements. Welcome back. Last time we touched upon the structural characteristics of oligopolies, the few, the interdependent. Now, let's gently wade into a rather fascinating and often ethically murky corner of this landscape: tacit collusion. We'll explore how firms in an oligopoly, without explicit agreements, can achieve outcomes that resemble a coordinated, almost conspiratorial market control. Think of it as a dance, a slow, knowing waltz, where the steps are never spoken aloud, but somehow, everyone knows the choreography. Before we delve into tacit collusion, let's briefly revisit the foundational models upon which our understanding rests: Cournot and Bertrand. Imagine two dominant firms operating in the same market. The Cournot model proposes that each firm decides on its output quantity independently, assuming the other firm's output remains constant. It's a game of strategic quantity setting, a careful calibration of production volumes, each firm watching the other, adjusting accordingly, striving to find their profit-maximizing balance. The eventual outcome is often somewhere between a perfectly competitive market and a monopolistic one, a compromise dictated by mutual awareness. Bertrand, on the other hand, shifts the focus to price. Here, firms compete by setting prices, assuming the other firm's price remains constant. The classical result of the Bertrand model is quite striking. Even with just two firms, if products are homogeneous, competition drives prices down to the marginal cost of production, mirroring the outcome of perfect competition. It's a powerful demonstration of the relentless pressure of price competition. In essence, each firm attempts to undercut the other until profitability vanishes. This seemingly simple difference, quantity versus price, has profound implications for market outcomes. They act as the base layer of decision-making. These models, however, are idealized. In the real world, firms rarely operate in such a vacuum. They observe each other's actions, learn from past mistakes, and anticipate future moves. This repeated interaction creates the potential for tacit collusion. Tacit collusion arises when firms, without any formal agreement, coordinate their actions to achieve higher profits than they would under competitive conditions. This coordination is achieved through subtle signals, established patterns of behavior, and a shared understanding of the market dynamics. Consider the practice of price leadership. One firm, often the largest or most established, takes the lead in announcing price increases. Other firms then follow suit, implicitly agreeing to maintain similar prices. No explicit communication is necessary. The signal is sent, understood, and acted upon. This dance of price adjustments maintains elevated profit margins for all involved. Another form of tacit collusion involves establishing territories or dividing markets. Firms may implicitly agree not to compete in certain geographic areas or customer segments. This allows each firm to enjoy a local monopoly, free from the threat of competition. Such arrangements are notoriously difficult to detect and prove, as they rely on patterns of behavior rather than explicit agreements. The effectiveness of tacit collusion depends on several factors. A key element is the ability of firms to monitor each other's actions. If firms can easily detect deviations from the agreed-upon pattern, they are more likely to punish those who cheat. This punishment can take the form of price wars, aggressive advertising campaigns, or other forms of retaliatory behavior. The threat of retaliation, even if never explicitly stated, is often enough to keep firms in line. However, tacit collusion is inherently unstable. The temptation to cheat, to deviate from the agreed-upon pattern in the hope of gaining a short-term advantage, is always present. If one firm believes it can get away with undercutting its rivals, it may be tempted to do so. This can trigger a breakdown of the collusive agreement, leading to a period of intense competition. The policymaker is always on the lookout. Moreover, external factors can also disrupt tacit collusion. The entry of new firms, changes in market demand, or technological innovations can all undermine the established patterns of behavior. The system finds a new, albeit unstable, balance. Understanding tacit collusion is crucial for the policymaker. It highlights the limitations of simple competition models and underscores the need for careful monitoring of market behavior. While it is difficult to prove the existence of tacit collusion, regulators can look for patterns of behavior that suggest coordinated action. Actions such as identical pricing strategies, limited product differentiation, and a reluctance to compete aggressively can all be indicative of tacit collusion. And so, we reach the end of our discussion of tacit collusion. We've explored the subtle dances, the implicit agreements, and the ever-present tension between cooperation and competition. It leaves us with a lingering question as we prepare to delve further into the intricacies of market regulations and competitive advantage. How do firms manage to sustain tacit agreements in dynamic markets? And when does an unwritten agreement start to require a more structured, legally defensible format? Chapter 27. Factors Facilitating Collusion. Market Structure and Information. Tonight, we consider the factors that grease the wheels of tacit or explicit collusion in oligopolistic markets. These factors can be broadly categorized under market structure and the availability of information. They determine the degree to which firms, even without explicit agreements, can coordinate their actions to achieve supranormal profits. Think of them as currents gently guiding ships toward a common harbor. Market structure plays a crucial role. The fewer the firms, the easier collusion becomes. It's simply more manageable to coordinate the actions of 2 or 3 entities than 20. A small number allows for easier monitoring and detection of deviations from any implicit agreement. Imagine trying to keep track of grains of sand on a beach versus pebbles in a pond. The task becomes exponentially harder as numbers increase. High concentration ratios, therefore, signal a potential for collusion, acting as a silent alarm to regulators. The policymaker, ever vigilant, watches these numbers carefully, seeking to identify patterns of coordinated behavior. Another structural element is product homogeneity. When products are nearly identical, as in the case of commodities like cement or certain chemicals, firms compete primarily on price. This creates a fertile ground for price wars, a destructive force that benefits no one in the long run. However, the sheer simplicity of competing on price makes it easier to detect deviations from a tacitly agreed-upon price level. If everyone is selling essentially the same thing, any significant price cut by one firm will be immediately obvious to all the others. It's like a ripple in a perfectly still pond. The disturbance is instantly noticeable. Differentiation, on the other hand, muddies the waters, making it harder to discern whether a rival's lower sales are due to price cutting or to perceived product improvements. This ambiguity can hinder collusion. The barriers to entry also exert a profound influence. High barriers, such as substantial capital requirements, restrictive regulations, or control of essential resources, limit the threat of new entrants. This reduced threat gives existing firms greater freedom to collude, knowing that any excessive profits are less likely to attract new competition. They can essentially share a pie, knowing there will be fewer new hungry mouths to feed. Now, let's consider the role of information. Transparency is a double-edged sword. On one hand, detailed information about rivals' costs, output levels, and pricing strategies can facilitate collusion. If everyone knows what everyone else is doing, it's easier to maintain a stable agreement, even if it's only tacit. It's akin to having a map of the other players' moves in a game of chess, allowing you to anticipate their responses and adjust your own strategy accordingly. Conversely, a lack of transparency can create suspicion and mistrust, leading to defection and the breakdown of collusion. The classical economist believed perfect information leads to efficient markets, but in oligopolies, that efficiency might come at the expense of consumer welfare. More informed actors can coordinate to extract rents. The frequency and regularity of interaction between firms also matters. Firms that interact frequently in multiple markets or that have a history of cooperation are more likely to collude. This repeated interaction fosters trust and allows for the development of sophisticated signaling mechanisms. It's like a dance. The more you practice with your partner, the more fluid and coordinated your movements become. Repeated interaction facilitates the evolution of implicit rules and norms that support collusion. Sanctions for deviation can also be more easily implemented and enforced through repeated interaction. The threat of future retaliation can deter firms from breaking ranks. Consider the legal environment. Explicit collusion, such as price-fixing agreements, is illegal in most developed countries. However, the strength of antitrust enforcement varies significantly across jurisdictions. In jurisdictions with weak enforcement, firms may be more willing to take the risk of colluding, either explicitly or tacitly. Strong enforcement, on the other hand, creates a powerful disincentive. The policymaker, therefore, holds the key to controlling these forces, setting boundaries to the game being played. The stability of market demand is another crucial factor. When demand is stable and predictable, it is easier for firms to coordinate their output levels and prices. Erratic demand, on the other hand, creates uncertainty and makes it more difficult to maintain a stable agreement. It's like trying to navigate a ship through turbulent waters. The unpredictable waves make it harder to stay on course. Volatility breeds instability, which in turn undermines collusion. In summary, the factors that facilitate collusion are complex and interconnected. They depend on the specific characteristics of the industry, the behavior of firms, and the regulatory environment. These elements interact like a delicate ecosystem, influencing the balance between competition and cooperation. Understanding these forces is crucial for anyone seeking to analyze the behavior of oligopolistic markets and to design effective policies to promote competition. Chapter 28. Detecting and Preventing Collusion. Antitrust Enforcement. Good evening. We've spent some time considering the nature of imperfect competition, exploring the spaces between perfect markets and pure monopoly. Tonight, our focus shifts to a particularly delicate area: oligopolies, markets dominated by a small number of players. And within that landscape, we'll consider the shadowy practice of collusion and the efforts to prevent it. Think of it as peering into the subtle currents of a pond, trying to discern whether the ripples are naturally occurring or deliberately orchestrated. Now, oligopolies present unique challenges. Unlike a perfectly competitive market where individual firms are price takers, or a monopoly where a single firm dictates terms, oligopolists are strategically interdependent. Their decisions profoundly impact each other. To understand this interplay, we often turn to two prominent models: Cournot and Bertrand. The Cournot model, at its heart, assumes that firms compete on quantity. Each firm decides how much to produce, taking as given the output decisions of its rivals. It's like a farmer deciding how many acres to plant, considering what other farmers in the region might be doing. The equilibrium, in this model, is a stable point where no firm can improve its profits by unilaterally changing its output level, given what the others are producing. It represents a kind of quiet stalemate, a balancing of forces. In contrast, the Bertrand model posits that firms compete on price. Each firm sets a price, believing that its rivals will hold their prices constant. This can lead to a very different outcome. Imagine two gas stations on opposite corners. If one slightly undercuts the other, it can capture a significant portion of the market. This price competition, in its purest form, can drive prices down to marginal cost, resulting in a near-competitive outcome, even with only two firms. It's a race to the bottom, fueled by the desire to capture market share. So, which model is more relevant in the real world? Well, that depends on the specific industry and the nature of competition. Industries with high fixed costs and relatively homogeneous products, like cement or steel, may be better described by the Cournot model. Here, capacity constraints and the difficulty of quickly adjusting output make quantity competition more plausible. Conversely, industries where products are easily differentiated and firms can quickly adjust prices might align more closely with the Bertrand model. Think of the soft drink market, where brands compete fiercely on price promotions and advertising. The ability to quickly match or undercut a competitor's price makes price competition a dominant feature. However, the critical point is this: both models highlight the incentive for firms in an oligopoly to collude. If firms can agree to restrict output or fix prices, they can collectively act like a monopolist and earn higher profits. This is where antitrust enforcement enters the picture. The policymaker, armed with legislation, seeks to detect and prevent such collusive behavior. Detecting collusion is notoriously difficult. Explicit agreements, the proverbial smoke-filled rooms, are rare. More often, collusion takes the form of tacit coordination, where firms signal their intentions to each other through subtle cues, such as price announcements or capacity adjustments. The classical economist might observe that even without explicit agreements, firms can learn to coordinate their behavior over time, leading to outcomes that mimic collusion. Antitrust authorities use a variety of tools to combat collusion, including leniency programs, sophisticated data analysis to detect suspicious pricing patterns, and, of course, the power to investigate and prosecute firms engaged in illegal collusion. The goal is to deter firms from even contemplating such behavior, preserving the benefits of competition for consumers. But the challenge persists. The line between legitimate competitive behavior and tacit collusion is often blurry. How can we be sure that firms are not simply responding to market signals, rather than engaging in a coordinated scheme? As we turn to the next chapter, we'll explore the complexities of mergers and acquisitions, and how they can further shape the competitive landscape. Are mergers simply a path to greater efficiency, or a threat to the delicate balance of competition? That is our next question. Chapter 29. Case Study 1. The Airline Industry, a Cournot or Bertrand world. Having explored the theoretical landscapes of oligopoly, we now turn our attention to a tangible, observable realm. We seek to understand how these models manifest in the world around us. Tonight, our case study focuses on the airline industry, a fascinating and often turbulent arena of economic competition. The question we pose is deceptively simple. Is the airline industry best described as a Cournot world, where firms compete primarily on quantity, or a Bertrand world, where price takes center stage? Recall that the Cournot model assumes firms simultaneously choose their production quantities, each aiming to maximize profit given their expectations about the output of their rivals. In this framework, the market price is determined by the aggregate supply of all firms. Think of two farmers deciding how many bushels of wheat to bring to market each harvest. In contrast, the Bertrand model sees firms competing directly on price. Consumers choose the firm offering the lowest price, and this price competition can, in theory, drive prices down to marginal cost, even with only a few firms in the market. Imagine two gas stations on opposite corners, constantly adjusting prices to lure in customers. At first glance, the airline industry might appear to lean towards the Bertrand model. Airlines are constantly advertising fares, engaging in price wars, and offering promotions to attract passengers. The act of booking a flight often feels like a relentless search for the lowest price, fueled by comparison websites and opaque algorithms. However, a deeper analysis reveals a more nuanced picture. The apparent price competition often masks underlying strategic considerations about capacity and network structure, elements more akin to quantity decisions. Consider, for instance, the decisions airlines make about the number of flights they operate on a particular route, the type of aircraft they deploy, and the frequencies they offer at different times of the day. These are not simply price adjustments. They are investments in capacity, signaling intentions about market share and future profitability. An airline that increases the frequency of its flights on a given route is essentially increasing its quantity of available seats, implicitly assuming that demand will meet this increased supply. This decision, in turn, will influence the pricing strategies of its competitors. Furthermore, the airline industry is characterized by significant barriers to entry, particularly in terms of airport slots, aircraft acquisition, and regulatory hurdles. These barriers limit the number of firms that can effectively compete on any given route, mitigating the fierce price competition predicted by the purest form of the Bertrand model. Established players enjoy network advantages, brand loyalty, and economies of scale that make it difficult for new entrants to undercut them significantly. Moreover, product differentiation plays a crucial role. While passengers may primarily be drawn by price, other factors influence their choice of airline, including frequent flyer programs, perceived service quality, and the convenience of flight schedules. Airlines actively cultivate these differentiating factors, attempting to build brand loyalty and reduce the sensitivity of demand to price changes. A passenger flying for business may prioritize schedule flexibility over price, while a leisure traveler may be more price sensitive but still prefer a particular airline's in-flight entertainment options. Therefore, the airline industry, while displaying elements of Bertrand competition, is perhaps more accurately described as a hybrid model, incorporating features of both Cournot and Bertrand frameworks. Airlines strategically manage their capacity, reflecting Cournot-like quantity decisions, while also engaging in price competition, reflecting Bertrand-like price setting. The balance between these two forces is constantly shifting, influenced by factors such as fuel prices, economic conditions, and regulatory changes. The policymaker, grappling with issues like airline mergers and slot allocation, must understand this complex interplay. Treating the industry as purely Bertrand could lead to flawed assumptions about the competitive effects of such policy interventions. A more sophisticated understanding, acknowledging the role of quantity competition and product differentiation, is essential for effective regulation. So, as we drift towards the close of our session, consider this. Is there a perfect oligopoly model for any real-world industry? Or are we always dealing with approximations? And if so, what methods are best for blending economic model to fit the situation? Case Study 2. The soft drink industry, Coke versus Pepsi. Welcome back. As we gently navigate the currents of economic thought, we move now from the abstract to the refreshing. Having considered the foundational aspects of oligopoly, let us now apply these principles to a real-world case, the enduring rivalry between Coca-Cola and PepsiCo. This classic duel provides a fascinating canvas upon which to paint the contrasting portraits of Cournot and Bertrand competition, and to observe their echoes in the actual market. Recall the essential difference. Cournot competition imagines firms choosing output quantities, allowing the market to then determine the price. Bertrand competition, on the other hand, posits that firms choose prices, and consumers then dictate the quantity each firm sells. In the soft drink industry, the reality is a nuanced blend of both, with periods leaning more heavily towards one model than the other. Consider, for a moment, the sheer scale of these enterprises. They are not small, independent producers. They are behemoths, wielding significant control over production, distribution, and crucially, branding. This inherent characteristic aligns, at least initially, with the Cournot model. Both companies make vast investments in production capacity, anticipating demand and planning their output accordingly. Their bottling plants, distribution networks, and supply chains are designed to handle specific volumes. Adjusting these volumes significantly in the short term is difficult and costly. Therefore, the output decision, viewed through this lens, holds substantial weight. However, the story doesn't end there. Branding, arguably, is the secret ingredient, the subtle flavor enhancer that shifts the competitive landscape towards the Bertrand model. Both Coke and Pepsi invest staggering sums in advertising, marketing, and brand building. They seek not simply to produce a beverage, but to cultivate a lifestyle, an image, an emotional connection with consumers. This intense focus on differentiation, on persuading consumers that their particular brand is superior, transforms the competition into a price war, albeit a subtle one. Imagine the marketing executive meticulously crafting a campaign designed to subtly undercut the competitor, not necessarily in price directly, but in perceived value. A new promotion, a clever slogan, a celebrity endorsement. These are all weapons in the Bertrand arsenal, designed to lure consumers away with the promise of greater satisfaction at a comparable price. This dance of perception, of influencing consumer choice through nuanced marketing strategies, is a hallmark of Bertrand competition in action. The real market, of course, is far more complex than either model alone can fully capture. We observe elements of both Cournot and Bertrand dynamics at play, shifting in emphasis depending on the market segment, geographic location, and the specific strategic initiatives undertaken by each company. In some regions, the battle may be primarily about volume, about securing shelf space and dominating distribution channels, reflecting a Cournot-like struggle for market share. In others, it may be more about crafting the perfect marketing message, about leveraging brand loyalty and influencing consumer preferences through carefully calibrated pricing and promotional strategies, indicative of Bertrand competition. Furthermore, we must acknowledge the influence of regulatory factors. The policymaker, ever vigilant, can shape the competitive landscape through antitrust regulations, restrictions on advertising, and interventions designed to protect consumer welfare. These interventions can disrupt the delicate balance between Cournot and Bertrand forces, pushing the industry towards one model or the other. For example, stricter regulations on advertising might limit the effectiveness of Bertrand-style marketing campaigns, forcing companies to compete more directly on volume and efficiency, thereby shifting the balance towards a Cournot-like equilibrium. Conversely, interventions that promote greater transparency in pricing could intensify price competition, making the market more susceptible to Bertrand-style price wars. Ultimately, the soft drink industry serves as a compelling illustration of the limitations of purely theoretical models. While Cournot and Bertrand provide valuable frameworks for understanding oligopolistic behavior, they are simplifications of a far more intricate reality. The enduring rivalry between Coke and Pepsi is a testament to the power of branding, the complexity of consumer behavior, and the ever-present influence of regulatory forces. The dynamic interplay of these factors creates a competitive landscape that defies easy categorization, a constantly evolving dance of strategy and counter-strategy. And as we conclude this case study, consider this. What new dimensions of competition arise as smaller craft beverage companies increasingly challenge the dominance of the giants? What happens when consumer preferences shift towards healthier options, or when technological innovations disrupt traditional distribution channels? These questions, like the gentle lapping of waves against the shore, beckon us towards our next exploration, the realm of game theory and its profound implications for strategic decision-making. Sleep well. Case Study 3. The automobile industry, global competition. Welcome back. As we gently drift from the intricacies of game theory in isolation, let's allow that current to carry us into a real-world illustration, the global automobile industry. It provides a compelling landscape for exploring the dance between Cournot and Bertrand models within an oligopolistic market structure. Recall that an oligopoly exists where a few firms dominate the market. This isn't the perfect competition ideal, nor is it a stark monopoly. It's a carefully balanced ecosystem where the actions of one firm invariably ripple through the entire system. The automotive sector embodies this dynamic remarkably well. Now, consider the essential difference between the Cournot and Bertrand models. In the Cournot model, firms compete on quantity. They independently decide how much to produce, taking into account what they think their rivals will produce. The market price then adjusts to clear the total supply. It's a game of strategic capacity planning, a silent ballet of production figures. Conversely, the Bertrand model posits that firms compete on price. Each firm sets its price, assuming its rivals' prices are fixed. Consumers then flock to the firm offering the lowest price, resulting in a market share division based on price differences. Think of it as a price war, a competitive fire that can quickly consume profits if not managed carefully. So, Which model better captures the reality of the automobile industry? The answer, as is often the case in economics, is it depends. Let's gently peel back the layers. Initially, one might lean towards a Cournot-like interpretation. Automobile manufacturers make significant investments in production capacity. Building a new factory, retooling an existing one, or developing a new model requires substantial capital expenditure and long lead times. These are all decisions about quantity, about how much to produce and when. The classical economist might argue that manufacturers meticulously analyze market demand, forecast competitor actions, and then commit to production levels designed to maximize their profits. It's a slow-moving, deliberate dance, influenced by long-term strategic considerations. However, the Bertrand dynamic also has a prominent role. Think about the intense price competition that regularly surfaces in the automotive market. Incentives like rebates, financing deals, and limited-time offers are all strategies to lure customers away from competing brands. The policymaker might point to the constant pressure on manufacturers to innovate and improve efficiency, driven by the threat of price undercutting. Consumers are acutely aware of price differences, especially within similar vehicle segments. This forces firms to constantly monitor and react to their rivals' pricing strategies, creating a dynamic, real-time competition. The true picture is a hybrid, a synthesis of both Cournot and Bertrand forces. The underlying long-term investments in capacity lend weight to the Cournot model, establishing a baseline level of production. The constant pressure to maintain market share and attract customers injects the Bertrand dynamic, forcing firms to carefully manage prices and promotional activities. This interplay manifests in several key observations. Firstly, product differentiation is crucial. Firms strive to create unique brands and models that are less susceptible to direct price comparisons. Features, styling, technology, and brand image all play a role in creating a buffer against purely price-based competition. This allows firms to exert some degree of control over their pricing, mitigating the fierce price wars predicted by the strict Bertrand model. Secondly, strategic alliances and joint ventures are common. Collaboration on research and development, production, and marketing allows firms to share costs, reduce risks, and potentially coordinate their actions, moving the market slightly closer to a coordinated Cournot outcome. Thirdly, government regulations and trade policies significantly influence the competitive landscape. Tariffs, emission standards, and safety regulations can all alter the cost structure and competitive positions of different firms, impacting both production quantities and pricing strategies. Ultimately, the global automobile industry provides a rich tapestry for understanding how oligopoly models function in the real world. It's a reminder that economic models are simplifications, not perfect representations of reality. They are tools to help us understand the underlying forces at play, but they must be applied with nuance and an awareness of the complexities of the market. Now, as we conclude this chapter, let us consider this. Given the rise of electric vehicles and the accelerating pace of technological innovation, how will the competitive dynamics of the automobile industry evolve in the coming years? Will the balance between Cournot and Bertrand forces shift, and what implications will this have for consumers, manufacturers, and the global economy? We'll explore this next time. Case Study 4. The telecommunications industry, market dynamics. Having gently explored the nuances of game theory, we now turn our gaze towards a tangible landscape, the telecommunications industry. A domain where technological innovation dances with strategic maneuvering, it provides fertile ground for understanding oligopoly models in action, specifically the tension between Cournot and Bertrand competition, and their reverberations in the real world. The telecommunications sector, globally, rarely resembles perfect competition. Instead, it often manifests as an oligopoly, a market dominated by a handful of powerful players. These firms, often infrastructure-heavy and requiring significant capital investment, wield considerable influence, making their strategic choices vital to both consumers and the overall economy. To understand their behaviors, we must consider the different models of oligopoly and how they play out in reality. The Cournot model, named after the classical economist, posits that firms compete on quantity. Each firm decides how much to produce, assuming its rival's output is fixed. Imagine two telecommunications companies, each deciding how much bandwidth to offer in a particular region. One company's decision to flood the market with bandwidth will inevitably depress prices, impacting the profitability of the other. This creates a delicate balance, a dance of supply and demand, where each step taken by one firm influences the movements of the other. In equilibrium, each firm produces a quantity that maximizes its profit, given the output of its rivals. The aggregate output is typically greater than what a monopoly would produce, but less than what a perfectly competitive market would offer. The resulting price is also somewhere in between, reflecting the market power wielded by these few dominant firms. The real-world implication is a pricing structure that isn't as consumer-friendly as a perfectly competitive scenario, but potentially more innovative due to the capacity for research and development that large companies can shoulder. Contrast this with the Bertrand model, where firms compete on price. Named after another influential economist, this model assumes that consumers will always choose the firm offering the lowest price. If two companies offer identical services, say, mobile data plans, the Bertrand model predicts a price war, driving prices down to marginal cost, effectively mimicking perfect competition. This sounds idyllic for consumers, but is often unsustainable in the real world of telecommunications. So why doesn't the Bertrand model always hold true in the telecommunications industry? Several factors come into play. Firstly, services are rarely truly homogeneous. Companies differentiate themselves through network quality, customer service, bundled offerings, and brand reputation. A slightly higher price might be justified if a consumer perceives a superior experience. Secondly, capacity constraints often limit the ability of one firm to completely capture the market, even if they offer a substantially lower price. Thirdly, consumers aren't always perfectly rational or perfectly informed. Brand loyalty, inertia, and marketing efforts can all sway consumer decisions, even in the face of marginal price differences. Real-world telecommunications markets often represent a hybrid of these two models. While price is a key competitive factor, companies also compete on network infrastructure, innovative services, and customer experience. Consider the rollout of 5G technology. Companies are investing heavily in infrastructure, a Cournot-like competition, to establish a technological advantage, influencing the quantity and quality of bandwidth offered. Simultaneously, they're aggressively advertising pricing plans and bundled services, engaging in a Bertrand-like competition to attract subscribers. Furthermore, regulatory oversight plays a significant role. The policymaker, in this arena, acts as a referee, ensuring fair competition, preventing anti-competitive practices, and safeguarding consumer interests. Spectrum auctions, for instance, determine which companies gain access to valuable radio frequencies, directly impacting their capacity and competitive advantage. Mergers and acquisitions are carefully scrutinized to prevent undue concentration of market power. These interventions shape the competitive landscape, steering it away from pure Cournot or Bertrand outcomes. The telecommunications industry, therefore, offers a rich tapestry of strategic interaction, blending elements of both Cournot and Bertrand competition. It demonstrates how real-world market dynamics are far more complex than simplified economic models, requiring a nuanced understanding of technology, consumer behavior, and regulatory forces. The dance between firms is a perpetual negotiation, a constant striving for equilibrium in an ever-changing environment. As we consider these dynamics, one wonders, if the telecommunications field is constantly changing with new players and strategies, what effect does this competition have on the rise of international economic trade, and what will that mean in the future? We will analyze trade routes and patterns in the next chapter. Chapter 33, Case Study 5. The Pharmaceutical Industry, Innovation and Pricing. We've explored theoretical landscapes, charting the contours of perfect competition and the often stark realities of monopoly. Now, our journey leads us to a territory nestled between these extremes, oligopoly. And what better place to observe the intricate dance of a few powerful players than the pharmaceutical industry, a realm where innovation and pricing engage in a complex waltz. This will be a crucial case to understand the real-world implications of Cournot and Bertrand models. Here, a handful of giants often dominate, each keenly aware of the other's moves. The stakes are high, the risks substantial, and the rewards, for successful innovation, potentially astronomical. Patents, acting as temporary monopolies, fuel this engine, providing a window for recouping vast research and development costs. But this window also invites scrutiny, particularly concerning pricing strategies. Let's consider the landscape through the lens of two prominent oligopoly models, Cournot and Bertrand. Imagine a tranquil lake. In the Cournot model, firms, like careful anglers, decide on the quantity of medicine they will produce and bring to market. They do so simultaneously, each anticipating the other's output. The aggregate supply then determines the market price. The result is often a price higher than what would prevail under perfect competition, yet lower than a pure monopoly price. Think of the development of a new treatment for a rare disease. 3 major pharmaceutical companies might, independently, estimate the market demand and decide how much of their drug they will manufacture. Their combined production then influences the final price. Each firm's profitability is inextricably linked to the decisions of its competitors. A higher production decision by one will invariably lower the price, affecting everyone. The delicate balance they seek is akin to a game of strategic positioning, where anticipation and calculated moves are paramount. Now, shift our perspective. Imagine, instead, the Bertrand model. Here, the firms compete not on quantity, but directly on price. Each company sets the price for its product, believing that consumers will flock to the lowest bidder. If products are perfect substitutes, essentially the same medicine from different manufacturers, the result is often a dramatic downward spiral, ultimately driving prices towards the marginal cost of production. This is because consumers can easily switch, making price the dominant factor. Consider generic drug markets. Once a patent expires, numerous companies begin producing essentially the same molecule. In this scenario, Bertrand competition becomes a powerful force. Companies engage in aggressive price wars, driving down costs and increasing access to medication. The speed at which generic drug prices decline post-patent expiration provides strong evidence for the relevance of the Bertrand model in this specific context. However, the real world is rarely as clean as these theoretical models. Pharmaceutical products are rarely perfect substitutes. Brand reputation, physician preferences, and even subtle differences in formulation can create a degree of product differentiation. This differentiation allows firms to exert some pricing power, even in the presence of competitors. Moreover, companies invest heavily in marketing and branding, further solidifying their market positions and influencing consumer choices. The pharmaceutical industry also faces intense regulatory scrutiny. Governments grapple with the challenge of balancing incentives for innovation with the imperative of ensuring affordable access to essential medicines. The policymaker, a key actor in this drama, must navigate a complex terrain of patent laws, pricing regulations, and international trade agreements. The policymaker might use reference pricing or negotiate directly with pharmaceutical companies to lower costs. This ongoing tension between innovation, profit, and access shapes the very landscape of the industry. Furthermore, the life cycle of a drug profoundly impacts its pricing. Early in its life cycle, protected by patents, a new drug commands a premium. As patents near expiration, anticipatory pricing strategies come into play. Companies might engage in tactics to extend their market exclusivity, such as developing new formulations or seeking additional patents for slightly modified versions of the drug. These strategies, while legal, often draw criticism for their potential to delay the entry of cheaper generic alternatives. So, as we reflect on the pharmaceutical industry, we see a dynamic interplay of Cournot-like quantity competition in certain segments, and Bertrand-like price competition in others, particularly in the generics market. The reality is a blend, complicated by product differentiation, regulatory interventions, and strategic maneuvering by powerful players. It is a world where the principles of oligopoly take on a particularly potent form. And as we conclude this chapter, consider this. As personalized medicine becomes increasingly prevalent, shifting the focus from mass-market drugs to tailored treatments for specific individuals. How will this fundamentally alter the dynamics of competition and pricing within the pharmaceutical industry? What new models of oligopoly might emerge to describe this future landscape? This is a question for another day, another contemplation. Chapter 34: Game Theory and Oligopoly. A broader perspective. We've journeyed through the landscapes of perfect competition and monopoly, noting their theoretical elegance. Now we find ourselves at a more complex intersection: the oligopoly. Recall our discussion of market structures. Oligopoly, a market dominated by a few firms, presents unique challenges and rewards when applying economic principles. Tonight, we'll gently explore two foundational models for understanding oligopolistic behavior: Cournot and Bertrand, and consider how they translate into the intricate dance of real-world markets. The Cournot model, named after the classical economist, presents a scenario where firms compete on quantity. Imagine two companies, each deciding how much of a particular product to produce, knowing that the market price will be determined by the total quantity supplied by both. Each firm makes its production decision independently, taking the other's output as a given. It's a strategic balancing act, a delicate weighing of potential profits against the anticipated actions of its rival. The equilibrium emerges where neither firm can increase its profit by unilaterally changing its output. Think of it as a teeter-totter finding its point of stability, not necessarily the optimal outcome for society, but a stable point nonetheless, given the self-interested nature of the actors involved. The Bertrand model, conversely, casts firms as competitors on price. Instead of deciding how much to produce, each firm chooses a price, knowing that consumers will buy from the firm offering the lower price. The logic is compellingly simple: undercut your rival and capture the entire market. This leads to a relentless downward pressure on prices, a race to the bottom that, paradoxically, can lead to a result mirroring perfect competition. If the firms offer identical products and have equal costs, the price will be driven down to marginal cost, the same outcome as in a perfectly competitive market. It's a powerful demonstration of how competitive forces can, even in the absence of numerous players, shape market outcomes. Imagine water seeking its own level. The price slowly drips down to its lowest possible point. The crucial difference between these models lies in the choice variable: quantity in Cournot, price in Bertrand. Which model is more applicable depends on the specific industry. Consider industries with high fixed costs and relatively stable demand, such as the airline industry or the automobile industry. In such cases, firms often make long-term commitments to capacity, making quantity competition a more natural fit dynamic. Conversely, industries where products are easily differentiated or where firms can quickly adjust prices might be better described by the Bertrand model. Think of the retail gasoline market, where prices can fluctuate rapidly in response to competitors' actions. However, the real world rarely adheres perfectly to these elegant theoretical constructs. In reality, firms often compete on both price and quantity, as well as on product differentiation, advertising, and innovation. These models are not meant to be perfect representations of reality, but rather simplified frameworks for understanding the strategic interactions that shape oligopolistic markets. They provide a lens through which the policymaker can better understand the potential effects of mergers, regulations, and other interventions. For example, consider the implications for antitrust policy. If an industry is best described by the Cournot model, a merger between two firms might lead to a significant reduction in output and an increase in price. Conversely, if the Bertrand model is more appropriate, the merger might have a less dramatic effect on prices, as the remaining firms could still engage in fierce price competition. The choice of model, therefore, has profound implications for how we understand and regulate oligopolistic markets. Furthermore, we must acknowledge the role of dynamic considerations. These models often assume a static environment where firms make decisions only once. In reality, firms interact repeatedly over time, learning from each other's actions and adjusting their strategies accordingly. This leads to more complex patterns of behavior, including tacit collusion, price leadership, and other forms of strategic interaction. The world of oligopoly is not a frozen landscape, but a flowing river, constantly changing and evolving. Tonight, we've merely scratched the surface of this fascinating and complex topic. We've seen how two foundational models, Cournot and Bertrand, offer contrasting perspectives on oligopolistic competition, highlighting the importance of the choice variable and the dynamics of strategic interaction. We've also touched upon the real-world implications of these models, particularly for antitrust policy and regulation. But what about markets with network effects, where the value of a product increases as more people use it? How do these dynamics further complicate the picture of oligopolistic competition? That, perhaps, is a question for another night, another dream of economic understanding. Chapter 35. The Prisoner's Dilemma. Applying game theory to collusion. Welcome back. If you recall, we've previously discussed the perfect competition model, a theoretical ideal where individual firms have no power to influence market prices. Now, we drift further from that ideal, entering the realm of oligopoly, a market structure dominated by a small number of large firms. Tonight, we'll explore how these firms, possessing considerable market power, interact, and particularly, how game theory illuminates their often tenuous dance of competition and cooperation. Oligopolies, by their very nature, invite strategic thinking. Each firm's actions have a direct and noticeable impact on its rivals. This interdependence creates a fascinating interplay, a complex system where prediction and reaction are key. To understand this dynamic, we turn to two cornerstone models, the Cournot model and the Bertrand model. These, while simplifications of reality, offer crucial insights into the behavior of firms in oligopolistic markets. The Cournot model, named after the early mathematician and economist, focuses on quantity competition. Imagine two firms, Firm A and Firm B, producing a homogeneous product, say, bottled water. In the Cournot world, each firm decides how much to produce, simultaneously and independently. Each firm's optimal production level is determined by anticipating the other firm's output. The total market supply is the sum of their individual outputs, and this combined supply determines the market price. If Firm A produces a large quantity, it drives the price down, impacting Firm B's profits. The Cournot equilibrium, then, represents a stable point where neither firm has an incentive to change its output, given the output of its rival. Now, let's shift our perspective to the Bertrand model, named after another astute observer of economic behavior. This model, in contrast to Cournot, emphasizes price competition. Instead of choosing quantities, the firms simultaneously choose prices. Consumers, always seeking the lowest price, will buy from the firm offering the best deal. The Bertrand model leads to a striking, and perhaps counterintuitive, result. Even with just two firms, competition drives the price down to marginal cost. The same outcome as in perfect competition. This outcome hinges on the assumption that the products are perfect substitutes and that firms can supply enough to meet all of the demand at the prevailing price. If one firm sets a price slightly below its rival, it captures the entire market. This relentless price war continues until the price reaches the cost of production. The classical economist found this outcome quite alarming, fearing widespread failure. But the real world is rarely so clean and predictable. The stark predictions of the Bertrand model rarely hold fully. Firms differentiate their products through branding, advertising, and perceived quality. Capacity constraints may also limit a firm's ability to capture the entire market, even if it offers the lowest price. These factors temper the intensity of price competition and allow firms to maintain prices above marginal cost. Furthermore, the real market implications of oligopolies extend far beyond simple quantity or price decisions. Firms may engage in collusion, either explicit or tacit, to maximize their joint profits. This is where the prisoner's dilemma emerges as a potent analogy. In this classic game theory scenario, two suspects are arrested for a crime. They are held separately and cannot communicate. Each suspect has the choice to cooperate or defect. If both cooperate, they receive a light sentence. If both defect, they receive a moderate sentence. But if one cooperates and the other defects, the defector goes free, while the cooperator receives a very harsh sentence. The parallels to oligopolistic firms are clear. Cooperation, in this context, means colluding to restrict output and raise prices, thereby increasing joint profits. Defection means cheating on the collusive agreement by producing more or lowering prices to capture a larger market share. Just like the prisoners, each firm faces a temptation to defect, even though cooperation would lead to a better outcome for both. The fear that the other firm will defect often leads both firms to defect, resulting in lower prices and profits for everyone. The policymaker is forever watchful of these tendencies. Collusion, of course, is often illegal, and antitrust authorities actively monitor markets for evidence of anti-competitive behavior. Tacit collusion, however, is more subtle and difficult to detect. Firms may signal their intentions through public announcements or engage in price leadership, where one firm sets the price and others follow. The prisoner's dilemma reminds us that even without explicit agreements, the temptation to defect can undermine cooperation and lead to outcomes that are less than optimal for the firms involved. A fragile balance, forever challenged by the winds of self-interest. So, as we consider these models and analogies, we must ask, how do repeated interactions, reputation, and strategic commitment influence the stability of collusive agreements in the long run? What other unseen forces are shaping the competitive landscape we will explore further in our next session? Chapter 36. Nash Equilibrium in Oligopoly. Strategic Stability. We've explored the foundations of market structures, observing the extremes of perfect competition and monopoly. Now, we turn our attention to the more common, and perhaps more intriguing, middle ground, oligopoly. Think of it as a river, flowing not in a single, powerful current, nor divided into countless rivulets, but rather as several distinct channels, each influencing the others. This interplay of a few dominant firms shapes the landscape of many modern industries. Our focus tonight rests upon the concept of Nash equilibrium, as it manifests within oligopolistic market. Recall that Nash equilibrium represents a state of strategic stability. Each player, in our case each firm, has chosen its best possible action given the actions of all other players. No firm can unilaterally improve its outcome by deviating from its current strategy, assuming all other firms hold steady. Consider then two prominent models that attempt to capture the strategic interactions within an oligopoly: the Cournot model and the Bertrand model. They offer contrasting, yet illuminating, perspectives. The Cournot model, named after the classical economist who first formalized it, posits that firms compete by choosing quantities of output. Imagine two firms, each deciding how much of a homogeneous good to produce. Each firm's profit maximization problem becomes intertwined with the output decision of the other. One must anticipate how much the other will produce, and then select its own quantity to maximize profit. The Nash equilibrium in a Cournot model is the set of output levels where each firm is producing its best possible quantity, given the output of the other. A subtle, intricate dance of calculated production. Picture this balance as a set of scales, with each firm's output choice influencing the market price and thereby the profitability of the other. An adjustment on one side necessitates a counter-adjustment on the other, until a stable point is reached, a state where neither firm sees an incentive to alter its production strategy. In contrast, the Bertrand model, named after the classical economist of a slightly different persuasion, suggests that firms compete on price, not quantity. This seemingly small shift in the strategic variable leads to dramatically different outcomes. If firms are selling identical products, consumers will always purchase from the firm offering the lowest price. The Nash equilibrium in the Bertrand model, with homogeneous products, is a surprisingly stark one. Both firms set price equal to marginal cost, resulting in zero economic profit. This is precisely the same outcome we would expect under perfect competition, even though only two firms exist. It's a curious paradox. Two firms, acting strategically, can drive prices down to the competitive level. Think of this as a pressure release valve. The intense pressure of price competition dissipates the potential for oligopolistic profits, forcing firms to operate as if they were under the relentless scrutiny of a perfectly competitive market. Now, let us consider the real-world implications of these models. Both Cournot and Bertrand offer valuable insights, yet neither perfectly captures the complexities of actual oligopolistic industries. The Cournot model is often seen as more applicable to industries where capacity constraints are significant, where firms cannot easily adjust output in response to changes in rivals' strategies. Examples might include commodity industries, such as oil or steel, where production capacity requires substantial investment. The Bertrand model, on the other hand, may be more relevant in industries where products are relatively homogeneous, and firms can easily adjust prices in response to rivals' actions. Consider online retail, where price comparisons are readily available, and firms can quickly adjust their prices to undercut competitors. However, the true landscape of oligopoly is far more nuanced. Firms often differentiate their products, softening the intensity of price competition. Brand loyalty, perceived quality differences, and advertising all play a role in influencing consumer preferences. In such cases, the Bertrand outcome of zero profits is unlikely to hold. Instead, firms can earn positive economic profits by carving out niche markets and appealing to specific customer segments. These strategies are like small dams built along our river's channels, creating pockets of stability and profitability. Furthermore, firms in oligopolistic industries often engage in tacit or explicit collusion, attempting to coordinate their actions to raise prices and increase profits. Such collusion, however, is often unstable, as each firm has an incentive to cheat on the agreement by slightly undercutting the agreed-upon price. The stability of collusive agreements depends on factors such as the ability to detect cheating and the credibility of punishment mechanisms. It's a precarious balancing act, subject to constant pressures and temptations. As we conclude this exploration of Nash equilibrium in oligopoly, we are left with a question. How do these strategic interactions evolve over time? How do firms learn from their past experiences and adapt their strategies in response to the actions of their rivals? This brings us to the dynamics of game theory and the concept of repeated games, a topic that will occupy us in our next session. For now, let the subtle balance of oligopolistic competition settle into your mind, a quiet contemplation before the dawn. Behavioral economics and oligopoly, incorporating cognitive biases. Good evening. Last time, we explored the foundational principles of oligopoly, focusing on the strategic interdependence that defines markets dominated by a handful of players. Now, let's gently drift into the complexities that arise when we blend these models with the insights of behavioral economics. We will look at the classical oligopoly models of Cournot and Bertrand, and then discuss real market applications while considering cognitive biases. Traditional oligopoly models, while useful, often operate under idealized assumptions. They presume perfect rationality, complete information, and a single-minded pursuit of profit maximization. However, human behavior, as we know, is rarely so perfectly calibrated. Behavioral economics offers a more nuanced perspective, acknowledging the cognitive biases and heuristics that frequently influence decision-making. Consider first the Cournot model. In this scenario, firms compete by choosing quantities of output simultaneously. The classical economist assumes each firm rationally anticipates the output decisions of its rivals and selects its own output level to maximize profit, given those expectations. A beautiful, mathematically elegant system balanced upon the fulcrum of rational self-interest. But what happens when we introduce, say, overconfidence? A firm might overestimate its ability to capture market share, leading it to produce more than is optimal, driving down prices and eroding profits for all. The system, once balanced, now tilts under the weight of hubris. Similarly, the availability heuristic, the tendency to overemphasize readily available information, could lead firms to misjudge demand or competitor behavior based on recent, but perhaps atypical, events. Now, let's turn to the Bertrand model, where firms compete on price. The classical economist proposes that this model leads to a particularly stark outcome: prices driven down to marginal cost, mirroring perfect competition, even with only two firms. This is, of course, under the assumption of perfect rationality. Each firm instantly undercuts the other until they both reach the minimum price. But in reality, such relentless price wars are less common than the classical model predict. Why? Why? Cognitive biases offer some potential explanations. Loss aversion, for instance, the tendency to feel the pain of a loss more acutely than the pleasure of an equivalent gain, can make firms hesitant to initiate price cuts, even if theoretically optimal. The fear of triggering a devastating price war outweighs the potential gains from slightly undercutting a competitor. Another bias, framing effects, suggests that the way price changes are presented can influence consumer perceptions and therefore firm behavior. The real-world implications of these considerations are profound. The policymaker, when evaluating antitrust concerns in oligopolistic markets, must be aware of these behavioral nuances. A merger that might appear benign under a purely rational framework could have anti-competitive effects if it exacerbates existing biases, such as groupthink or herding behavior. The system's balance can be easily upset by the human elements within it. Furthermore, businesses can leverage behavioral insights to their advantage. Understanding that consumers are often influenced by anchoring bias, the tendency to rely too heavily on the first piece of information received, allows firms to strategically set initial prices or introduce reference points that shape consumer perceptions of value. Product differentiation, too, mitigates the intensity of price competition predicted by the basic Bertrand model, because consumers have preferences beyond price. Consider the airline industry. The classical Bertrand model would suggest intense price competition on identical routes. Yet, airlines maintain varying fare structures, loyalty programs, and perceived levels of service, thus differentiating themselves and mitigating the race to the bottom. This is a prime example of how understanding and responding to consumer preferences, including cognitive biases, can sustain profitability in an oligopolistic market. So, as we can see, incorporating behavioral economics into our understanding of oligopoly models adds a layer of realism and complexity. It moves us away from the idealized world of perfect rationality and closer to the messy, unpredictable reality of human behavior. It highlights the importance of considering not just what firms should do according to economic theory, but what they actually do, given the cognitive biases and limitations that shape their decision-making. This adds nuance to our analysis of real-world situations, but also adds complexity as we try to model this. But what new economic insights could we unlock by focusing on the dynamics of cooperation and collusion within oligopolies, in light of the same behavioral biases? We will ponder that next time. Good night. Dynamic oligopoly models. Evolution and adaptation. Welcome back. In our previous exploration, we dissected the static nature of market structures, holding time constant, like examining a single frame of a bustling film. Now, we allow the film to roll. We introduce the dimension of time, and with it, the elegant dance of adaptation and evolution within oligopolistic markets. Tonight, we consider the dynamism inherent in oligopoly models, focusing on how firms adapt to each other's strategies over time, and the real-world implications of these adaptations. At the heart of our discussion lie the two titans of oligopoly modeling, Cournot and Bertrand. These are not merely abstract constructions. They are simplified representations of the strategic interplay that defines industries dominated by a handful of powerful firms. Let us recall their essence. In the Cournot model, firms compete on quantity, independently choosing how much to produce, anticipating the output of their rivals. Price is then determined by the aggregate supply. In contrast, the Bertrand model posits competition on price. Firms simultaneously choose their prices, and consumers purchase from the firm offering the lowest price. The stark difference in their assumptions leads to strikingly different outcomes, especially in static settings. But the real world rarely sits still. The static models are a starting point, a foundation upon which we build our understanding of dynamic interactions. Consider the shift from a Cournot setting to something resembling Bertrand, a period of stability where firms carefully manage output, avoiding aggressive competition, might be shattered by a technological innovation. One firm, perhaps seizing an opportunity to reduce production costs, may decide to undercut its rivals, initiating a price war. This is the system adapting. The delicate balance of quantity competition yields to the harsh reality of price competition. The classical economist's carefully calculated equilibrium is disrupted by a sudden, unforeseen change. Conversely, a Bertrand setting, characterized by intense price competition and razor-thin margins, can evolve towards a more Cournot-like scenario. Suppose, for example, that firms begin to differentiate their products, either through branding, added services, or niche marketing. This differentiation, however subtle, grants each firm a degree of market power, allowing them to exert some influence over the quantity demanded at a given price. The relentless price war softens, and the firms begin to act more as if they are setting quantities, rather than engaging in a constant price battle. The water finds a new level. A new equilibrium emerges. It's a quiet victory for strategic positioning. The shift between these models, and indeed, the creation of more complex and nuanced models, is driven by the interplay of numerous factors. Technological advancements, regulatory changes, shifts in consumer preferences, and the entry or exit of firms all contribute to the dynamic evolution of oligopolistic markets. The policymaker, watching from afar, must be particularly attuned to these shifts. Real-world industries rarely conform perfectly to either Cournot or Bertrand. Instead, they often exhibit characteristics of both, blending elements of quantity and price competition in complex and nuanced ways. Consider the airline industry, for example. While airlines certainly compete on price, they also differentiate themselves through route networks, frequent flyer programs, and service quality. The competitive landscape is constantly shifting, with airlines entering new markets, merging with rivals, and adjusting their strategies in response to changing economic conditions and consumer demand. It's a constantly evolving ecosystem, far more intricate than our simple models suggest. The dynamic nature of oligopoly models has profound implications for both firms and policymakers. For firms, it underscores the importance of adaptability and strategic foresight. A strategy that is successful in one period may become obsolete in another. Firms must be constantly monitoring the competitive landscape, anticipating future changes, and adapting their strategies accordingly. The ability to learn, to evolve, to anticipate. These are the keys to survival and success in the dynamic world of oligopoly. For policymakers, the dynamic nature of oligopoly models highlights the need for flexible and adaptive regulatory frameworks. Regulations that are too rigid or prescriptive can stifle innovation and prevent firms from adapting to changing market conditions. The goal of regulation should be to promote competition and efficiency, while allowing firms the freedom to innovate and adapt. It is a delicate balance, requiring careful consideration of the specific characteristics of each industry and the potential consequences of different regulatory approaches. We have merely scratched the surface tonight. We might ask ourselves, what are the limits of adaptation? Can firms always evolve to survive, or are there inherent constraints that ultimately lead to decline? What role does innovation play in shaping the long-run evolution of oligopolistic markets? These are questions that will guide us as we delve deeper into the complexities of market structure and strategic interaction. Good night. The impact of technology on oligopoly. Disruption and innovation. Having considered the general landscape of oligopolies, let us now turn our attention to the profound influence of technology on these concentrated market structures. Technology, like a relentless river, erodes old landscapes and carves new channels. Its impact on oligopolies is particularly intriguing, forcing a re-evaluation of established models and a recognition of emergent real market implications. Recall the foundational models we explored earlier: Cournot and Bertrand. The Cournot model, with its emphasis on quantity competition, painted a picture of firms strategically selecting output levels, anticipating the actions of their rivals. It was a world of cautious calculus, where firms gingerly probed the market, fearful of triggering a damaging output war. The Bertrand model, in contrast, highlighted price competition. Here, firms aggressively undercut each other, driving prices down towards marginal cost. A starker, more Darwinian landscape perhaps. Traditional economic thought often pitted these models against each other, seeking to determine which one more accurately reflected reality. But the true value lies not in choosing a victor, but in understanding the conditions that favor one model over the other, or even more importantly, the circumstances that render both incomplete. Technology introduces layers of complexity that can significantly alter the competitive dynamics within an oligopoly. Consider the impact of the internet. It has drastically reduced search costs for consumers, making price comparisons far easier and instantaneous. This increased price transparency tilts the balance towards Bertrand competition, potentially eroding the comfortable profit margins enjoyed by oligopolists in less transparent times. However, the internet also fosters product differentiation. Firms can tailor their offerings, provide personalized services, and build strong brands through online marketing and customer relationship management. This creates opportunities to escape the purely price-based competition of Bertrand and carve out niches based on perceived value and brand loyalty. The classical economist might argue that even in the age of the internet, a strong brand can function as a barrier to entry, reinforcing an oligopolistic structure. Furthermore, technology enables innovation. New products and processes can disrupt established oligopolies, creating opportunities for new entrants or allowing smaller firms to gain market share. Imagine the sudden arrival of a disruptive technology in the telecommunications sector. Suddenly, the power of established players erodes as new players enter with a totally new approach, attracting the customers. The policymaker now has to ask, does it allow the old oligopoly to squash them before they can truly become something? Consider, for example, the impact of cloud computing on the software industry. It has lowered the barriers to entry, allowing smaller companies to compete with established giants. Open source software and collaborative development platforms further accelerate this process, fostering innovation and disrupting traditional business models. The real market implications of technology in oligopolistic settings are multifaceted. We see a constant tension between the forces of price competition and product differentiation. Firms invest heavily in research and development, seeking to gain a technological edge and differentiate themselves from their rivals. They also engage in strategic alliances and collaborations, sharing resources and expertise to accelerate innovation. The pace of technological change also introduces a dynamic element to oligopolistic competition. Firms must constantly adapt and innovate to remain competitive. The oligopoly of one era may be disrupted by a new technology, giving rise to a new set of dominant players. The flow of innovation continuously reshapes the market landscape, presenting both opportunities and challenges for firms operating in these concentrated industries. And as the digital world becomes more important, the lines are even more blurred. We see then that the traditional models of Cournot and Bertrand, while still valuable analytical tools, require careful contextualization when applied to technology-driven oligopolies. The interaction between quantity and price competition becomes more complex, influenced by factors such as product differentiation, network effects, and the speed of innovation. The key now is to see where the market will go next, what the next phase is. As technology continues its relentless march forward, what new competitive dynamics will emerge in these oligopolistic landscapes? And what will become of the regulatory frameworks designed to ensure fair competition and protect consumers? These are questions to ponder as we turn to the next chapter. Chapter 40. Network Effects and Oligopoly. The Power of Connectivity. Friends, consider how far we've traveled in our exploration of markets. From the simple transactions of perfect competition to the concentrated power of monopolies. Now we find ourselves in a middle ground, a landscape dominated by a few powerful actors, the realm of oligopoly. We spoke earlier of how network effects can create winners that tend to monopolize a given space, but that rarely happens, at least in the long run. What emerges instead is something that looks and feels like an oligopoly. Tonight, we delve deeper into the dynamics of these strategic interactions, specifically focusing on two pivotal models, Cournot and Bertrand. Imagine a river delta, branching and merging. Each channel represents a firm's decision and the flow of water, the total output in the market. The Cournot model, a cornerstone of oligopoly theory, paints a picture where firms compete on quantity. Each firm, acting independently, decides how much to produce, taking into account what it believes its rivals will produce. It's a delicate dance of anticipation and reaction. The classical economist might view this as a game of imperfect information, each firm attempting to maximize its profit, knowing that its decisions will impact the market price and therefore the profits of its competitors. Think of two oil companies, each controlling a significant share of the market. Company A estimates that Company B will produce a certain amount of crude. Based on this estimate, Company A decides its own production level to maximize its profits. Company B, in turn, does the same, reacting to Company A's anticipated output. This process continues until a Nash equilibrium is reached, a point where neither firm has an incentive to change its output given the other firm's production level. The result is a market output that is higher than that of a monopoly, but lower than that of perfect competition, and a price that falls somewhere in between. A steady state has been achieved, but it's a carefully balanced one. Now let us shift our perspective. Consider a different river, this time converging at a single point, the marketplace. Here, firms compete not on quantity, but on price. This is the essence of the Bertrand model. Imagine two companies, both offering the same product. Consumers, naturally, will choose the company offering the lower price. In this scenario, the logical outcome seems almost paradoxical. Each firm, striving to capture the entire market, will continuously undercut the other until the price is driven down to the marginal cost of production. At that point, any further price reduction would result in losses. This outcome remarkably mirrors that of perfect competition, even though only two firms are involved. This is the power of price competition. A seemingly simple shift in the competitive instrument, from quantity to price, dramatically alters the market outcome. However, the Bertrand model relies on several key assumptions, notably, that firms have identical products and that consumers are perfectly aware of prices. The policymaker understands that in the real world, these assumptions often fail to hold true. Real markets are complex ecosystems, where products are often differentiated by brand, features, or perceived quality. Consumers may not always have perfect information, and firms may be able to sustain prices above marginal cost through advertising, brand loyalty, or other strategies. The implications of these models extend far beyond theoretical exercises. They provide a framework for understanding the behavior of firms in various industries, from airlines to telecommunications. In the airline industry, airlines frequently compete on prices, but can't drive prices down to marginal cost, or they would fail in the marketplace. The Cournot and Bertrand models, therefore, offer distinct lenses through which to view oligopolistic competition. The classical economist may prefer the Cournot model because it more naturally represents a market where it takes time to expand production. The policymaker, however, may lean toward Bertrand as the model for driving prices down and maximizing market efficiency. Understanding their strengths and limitations allows us to anticipate firm behavior and craft effective policies to promote competition and protect consumer welfare. It is a delicate balancing act, ensuring that firms have incentives to innovate and improve efficiency while preventing them from exploiting their market power. Consider, finally, the role of collusion. Explicit or tacit agreements between firms to fix prices or divide markets can undermine the benefits of competition. Detecting and preventing such collusion is a crucial task for antitrust authorities worldwide. It's about maintaining the flow of our economic river, preventing it from being dammed up by anti-competitive practices. And so, we reach the end of our exploration for tonight. As the river flows into the sea, we find ourselves at the edge of another fascinating question. As industries mature and technology evolves, what new forms of competition will emerge in the digital age? Will the network effects that created some of the world's largest firms lead to new models of oligopoly, or even, dare we say, a new form of competition we have yet to fully understand? Globalization and oligopoly, expanding market boundaries. Ah, yes. We've traversed the landscapes of perfect competition and monolithic monopolies. Now, let us gently navigate the more complex terrain of oligopoly. A landscape, if you will, dominated by a few key players, each keenly aware of the other's moves. Think of it as a delicate dance, where every step influences the next, a subtle ballet of supply and demand. Tonight, our focus narrows to two fundamental models that attempt to capture this intricate dance: the Cournot model and the Bertrand model. Both offer lenses through which we can examine the behaviors of firms within an oligopolistic market. But like two different celestial maps of the same night sky, they offer contrasting perspectives. The Cournot model, named after a pioneering figure, assumes that firms compete on quantity. Imagine two water bottling companies controlling the supply of a pristine mountain spring. Each company, in isolation, must decide how much water to bottle and sell, taking into account the anticipated production of its rival. The central idea is that each firm's output decision implicitly defines the residual demand faced by the other. So, each firm optimizes its production, finding the quantity that maximizes profit given the expected production of the competitor. This process continues until a stable equilibrium is reached, where no firm can improve its profit by unilaterally changing its output. It is a beautiful, stable balance of forces. Think of it as a slow, deliberate adjustment. The companies incrementally refine their production levels, nudging the market towards a point where supply and demand find equilibrium. It is a process steeped in assumptions of limited foresight and responsiveness. And while simplistic, it offers invaluable insights into industries where capacity adjustments are slow and costly, such as mining or agriculture. Now, contrast this with the Bertrand model. This model, named after another visionary, shifts the focus from quantity to price. In this scenario, firms compete by setting prices, and consumers choose to purchase from the firm offering the lowest price. The implication is profound. If both firms are selling an identical product, the equilibrium price will be driven down to the marginal cost of production. It's a seemingly brutal dance, a race to the bottom where only minimal profits are secured. Consider two gas stations across the street from each other. If one station lowers its price, it can capture the lion's share of the market, forcing the other to match or risk losing all its customers. The Bertrand model suggests that even with just two competitors, the outcome can resemble perfect competition, where profits are slim. Of course, this hinges on the assumption of identical products and perfectly informed consumers. A slight difference in perceived quality, brand loyalty, or location convenience can significantly alter the dynamics. So, which model better reflects reality? The answer, of course, is it depends. The choice depends on the specific characteristics of the industry and the competitive landscape. Industries with high barriers to entry, significant product differentiation, and slow capacity adjustments might be better approximated by the Cournot model. Industries with relatively homogeneous products, low switching costs for consumers, and quick price adjustments may be more closely aligned with the Bertrand model. In the real world, many oligopolies operate somewhere between these two extremes. Firms may engage in a complex interplay of quantity and price competition, strategically adjusting their strategies in response to market conditions. They may also engage in non-price competition, such as advertising, product innovation, and brand building, to differentiate themselves from their rivals and gain a competitive edge. Consider the mobile phone industry, a landscape where both price and perceived quality play significant roles. The competition is fierce, a constant battle for market share, yet it unfolds in nuanced ways that neither model fully captures. Furthermore, the forces of globalization have added another layer of complexity. As markets become increasingly interconnected, oligopolistic firms face competition from rivals across borders. This can lead to a blurring of the lines between different models, as firms adapt their strategies to navigate the challenges and opportunities of a globalized marketplace. The increasing reach of technology firms illustrates this convergence, with cross-border competition now standard. These models, while simplifying the realities of oligopolistic competition, give us critical insights. They allow us to ask deeper questions, to understand the dynamics that drive firm behavior in markets that shape our modern economies. And yet one might wonder, as new technologies emerge and further dissolve market boundaries, how will our classical understandings of market equilibrium evolve in this ever-changing global landscape? That perhaps is a question for another evening's reflection. The role of regulation in oligopolistic markets. Balancing efficiency and equity, we've navigated the landscapes of perfect competition and wrestled with the shadows of monopoly. Now, our journey brings us to a terrain that lies somewhere in between, a market structure where a few powerful players hold sway, the oligopoly. This evening we'll consider how regulations attempt to navigate this complex economic environment, seeking to balance the currents of efficiency and the demands of equity. The oligopoly, by its nature, is a delicate ecosystem. A small number of firms, each aware of the other's actions, engage in a strategic dance. Their decisions regarding output, pricing, and even innovation are intricately intertwined. To understand this interplay, economists have developed various models, two of the most prominent being the Cournot and Bertrand models. These models, while simplified representations of reality, offer valuable insights into the potential outcomes of oligopolistic competition. The Cournot model, conceived by the classical economist, pictures firms competing on quantity. Imagine a market for bottled water, dominated by a few key producers. Each producer, guided by the unseen hand of self-interest, decides how much water to bring to market, anticipating the production decisions of its rivals. The total supply, and consequently the market price, is then determined by the sum of individual firms' output. The beauty, or perhaps the complexity, lies in the iterative nature of this process. Each firm adjusts its production based on its competitor's prior output, eventually reaching a point of equilibrium. This equilibrium, however, is typically less efficient than perfect competition, resulting in higher prices and lower overall output. The Bertrand model, on the other hand, takes a different perspective. Here, firms compete on price. Our bottled water producers, instead of deciding how many bottles to produce, now set their prices, hoping to lure consumers away from their competitors. The allure of the Bertrand model lies in its stark prediction. If the product is homogeneous, that is, identical across firms, even a slight price difference will cause consumers to flock to the cheaper option. This relentless price competition can drive prices down to the level of marginal cost, mirroring the outcome of perfect competition. However, this seemingly beneficial outcome hinges on the assumption of identical products and perfect information, assumptions which rarely hold perfectly in the real world. So, what are the real market implications of these models? They serve as benchmarks, theoretical anchors that allow us to analyze the behavior of oligopolistic industries. In reality, oligopolies rarely conform perfectly to either the Cournot or Bertrand ideal. Instead, they often exhibit a hybrid of behaviors, strategically shifting between quantity and price competition, depending on the specific industry characteristics and competitive landscape. The policymaker, tasked with promoting economic welfare, faces a challenging task in regulating oligopolistic markets. Complete laissez-faire can lead to anti-competitive behavior, such as price fixing or collusion, which harms consumers and stifles innovation. However, overly stringent regulations can stifle efficiency and innovation, preventing firms from achieving economies of scale or investing in new technology. Regulation, therefore, must be carefully calibrated. Antitrust laws, designed to prevent monopolies and promote competition, play a crucial role. These laws can prohibit mergers that would lead to excessive market concentration and prosecute firms engaging in collusive practices. However, applying these laws requires careful consideration of the specific industry context, as seemingly anti-competitive behaviors may sometimes be justified by efficiency considerations. Furthermore, regulations can focus on promoting transparency and information disclosure. By providing consumers with more information about prices, product quality, and other relevant factors, the policymaker can empower them to make more informed choices, increasing competitive pressure on firms. The goal, ultimately, is to foster a dynamic equilibrium, one where firms compete vigorously but fairly, driving innovation and providing consumers with high-quality products at reasonable prices. This is a delicate balance, a constant negotiation between the forces of efficiency and the demands of equity. The question then becomes, as technology continues to reshape market structures, and the concept of a firm itself becomes more fluid, how must our regulatory frameworks evolve to ensure this delicate balance remains intact? This is a question that will occupy us as we move forward in our exploration of the ever-changing economic landscape. Chapter 43. The Future of Oligopoly. Emerging Trends and Challenges. Tonight, we continue our journey through the fascinating landscape of market structures. We've seen how competition, in its purest form, shapes prices and quantities. Now, let's turn our gaze towards the more intricate, often more challenging, realm of oligopoly, where a handful of firms hold considerable sway. The very word, oligopoly, whispers of strategic interaction. Each player's actions reverberate, influencing not only its own fortunes, but also those of its rivals. Understanding this interdependence is key to unraveling the complexities of these markets. Central to this understanding are two classic models, each offering a distinct perspective on firm behavior: the Cournot model and the Bertrand model. Think of them as two sides of the same coin, each reflecting a different facet of the competitive dance. The Cournot model, named after the astute 19th century mathematician, assumes that firms compete on the quantity of output they produce. Each firm, acting independently, chooses its production level, taking into account the expected output of its competitors. The resulting market price is then determined by the total supply. It's a vision of firms cautiously adjusting their production dials, mindful of the collective impact. Imagine a slow, deliberate waltz, each step carefully considered. The Bertrand model, conversely, posits that firms compete on price. In this scenario, each firm sets its price, believing that consumers will flock to the lowest bidder. This leads to a rather remarkable outcome. If firms produce identical goods, even with only two players, the market price will be driven down to the level of marginal cost, mirroring the result of perfect competition. A price war, if you will, a rapid descent towards equilibrium. It's a faster-paced tango, full of sharp turns and unexpected dips. Now, the crucial question: which model better reflects reality? The answer, as is so often the case in economics, is it depends. The choice hinges on the specific characteristics of the industry in question. If firms face capacity constraints, for instance, the Cournot model might offer a more accurate representation. If, however, firms can easily adjust their production levels to meet demand, the Bertrand model may be more appropriate. Consider the airline industry. Airlines often have fixed routes and limited seating capacity. Adjusting the number of flights is not always a straightforward task. Therefore, the Cournot model, with its emphasis on quantity competition, might provide a more insightful framework for analyzing airline behavior. On the other hand, the telecommunications industry, where firms can quickly adjust pricing plans, might be better understood through the lens of the Bertrand model. Furthermore, real-world oligopolies are rarely static. Firms engage in a variety of strategic maneuvers beyond simply choosing quantities or prices. They invest in research and development, advertise their products, and attempt to differentiate themselves from their rivals. These actions can profoundly influence market outcomes, blurring the lines between the idealized models and the messy reality. In recent years, we've witnessed the rise of new forms of oligopoly, particularly in the digital realm. Platform-based businesses, with their network effects and winner-take-all dynamics, present unique challenges for both policymakers and economists. How do we ensure that these dominant platforms do not abuse their market power? How do we foster innovation and competition in these rapidly evolving industries? The policymaker, tasked with safeguarding consumer welfare, often grapples with these questions. Antitrust laws, designed to prevent monopolies and promote competition, are constantly being adapted to address the novel challenges posed by the digital economy. The classical economist's insights, while foundational, often require careful reinterpretation in light of these new realities. Looking ahead, the future of oligopoly is likely to be shaped by several key trends. The increasing globalization of markets, the accelerating pace of technological change, and the growing importance of data as a strategic asset will all play a crucial role. The dance between these forces will determine the shape of the economic landscape for years to come. And so, as we conclude our discussion of oligopoly models, let us contemplate the horizon. What new forms of market structure will emerge in the future? Will the traditional tools of economic analysis remain sufficient to understand these new forms, or will we need to develop entirely new frameworks? These questions, my friends, are the seeds of future inquiry. Chapter 44. Public Policy Implications, Promoting Competition and Consumer Welfare. A introduction. Having explored the intricate dance of firms within oligopolistic markets, it's time to consider the implications for public policy. Our journey thus far has charted the course of imperfect competition, highlighting the strategic interdependencies that define oligopoly. Tonight, we'll turn our attention to how these theoretical models, particularly the Cournot and Bertrand models, inform real-world policy designed to promote competition and safeguard consumer welfare. Think of it as adjusting the sails of the economic ship to navigate the sometimes choppy waters of concentrated markets. Cournot versus Bertrand. A policy perspective. The Cournot and Bertrand models, as you'll recall, offer contrasting perspectives on how firms compete in an oligopoly. The Cournot model assumes firms compete on quantity, while the Bertrand model posits competition on price. From a policy standpoint, this distinction is critical. If an industry tends towards Cournot behavior, that is, firms are strategically setting quantities, then policies aimed at restricting output, such as regulating production quotas or preventing mergers that would lead to increased market concentration, might be effective. The policymaker would aim to maintain a healthy level of rivalry by preventing any single entity from dominating supply. Conversely, if an industry leans towards Bertrand competition, where prices are the primary weapon, then policies focusing on price transparency and preventing collusion become paramount. The classical economist understood that when firms can easily observe and respond to each other's prices, the temptation to collude is amplified. Thus, antitrust authorities must vigilantly monitor pricing practices, looking for evidence of price fixing or tacit agreements that harm consumers. Promoting information flow about prices can paradoxically both encourage and deter competition, a fine balance indeed. Real-world implications and policy tools. The real world, as always, is a complex tapestry woven with threads of both Cournot and Bertrand behavior. Industries rarely fit neatly into one model or the other. Consider the airline industry, a frequent case study in oligopoly. While airlines compete on price, offering various fare classes and promotional deals, they also implicitly compete on capacity, determining how many seats to offer on a given route. Policy interventions in this sector might involve regulating airline mergers to prevent excessive concentration, while also monitoring pricing strategies to ensure fair competition and prevent predatory practices. The goal is to foster a dynamic equilibrium where both price and quantity are subject to competitive pressures. Another example can be seen in the telecommunications industry. The infrastructure required for telecommunications creates significant barriers to entry, often resulting in a small number of dominant players. In such cases, regulators might focus on ensuring access to essential facilities, such as network infrastructure, to promote competition from smaller players. This facilitates a more Bertrand-like competition, even if the underlying infrastructure limitations suggest a Cournot-like supply restraint. The policymaker's challenge is to identify these hybrid market structures and tailor policies accordingly. Consumer welfare as the guiding star. Ultimately, the overarching goal of any policy intervention in oligopolistic markets is to promote consumer welfare. This means ensuring that consumers have access to a wide range of choices, at prices that reflect the true cost of production and a reasonable profit margin for firms. Policies that restrict competition, whether intentionally or unintentionally, can lead to higher prices, reduced innovation, and lower quality goods and services. The classical economist knew that a vibrant, competitive market is the best engine for innovation and efficiency, benefiting consumers in the long run. However, simply breaking up large firms isn't always the optimal solution. Sometimes, scale economies are necessary to achieve efficiency and innovation. The policymaker must weigh the potential benefits of increased competition against the potential costs of sacrificing these scale economies. This requires a nuanced understanding of the specific industry in question and a careful assessment of the likely impact of any proposed policy intervention. Conclusion: navigating the oligopolistic seas. Our discussion tonight underscores the importance of understanding the dynamics of oligopolistic markets in order to design effective public policy. The Cournot and Bertrand models provide valuable frameworks for analyzing these markets, but they are just starting points. The real world demands a more sophisticated approach, one that recognizes the complexity of strategic interactions and the need to tailor policies to specific industry characteristics. And as we conclude, consider this. As markets become increasingly global and interconnected, how will these established oligopoly models adapt to reflect cross-border competition and the rise of multinational corporations? That is a question for another night and another economic exploration. Che.